Hello, I'm Jessica, a 30-year-old woman. I want to share a recent experience that helped me through a tough time with my husband and his family. This happened a few months ago, and even though things have calmed down, I'm still working through the emotions. I think talking about it might help me heal. Let's go back 3 years when I made a big decision, marrying my boyfriend Tyler. We met through friends and had 3 great years together before getting married. Tyler was fun, caring, and loving. He came from a wealthy family and had a good job, so he often bought me gifts and showed me affection. We both loved to travel, which made our bond stronger. As we got more serious, my friends were happy for us and praised Tyler. Tyler was very generous, sometimes too much. For example, he bought me a new laptop when I graduated college. I felt uneasy about not being able to spend as much as he did. I'd say, "Tyler, I'm just a college student. I can't match your spending. Let's try to split other costs at least." But Tyler would insist on treating me, saying his friends did the same for their partners. Over time, I got used to it but still tried to contribute as much as I could. After I got a good job, we started sharing expenses more equally and even talked about moving in together. One day, Tyler suggested, "You can move in with me. I inherited my house from my grandpa, so no worries about rent, but we should split other expenses to keep things fair." Even though I was unsure, he reassured me, and we began living together. We agreed to share the financial responsibilities fairly given our different incomes, and everything was going well until I met Tyler's family. They lived far away, and since Tyler was busy with work, I had to host his parents and sister alone. Tyler warned me they could be judgmental but didn't go into details. He suggested I ignore any hurtful comments. I tried to stay positive, but my optimism faded when they arrived. Instead of a warm welcome, Tyler's parents and sister seemed annoyed. This set a tense atmosphere. During our conversations, it was clear they didn't like me. "So you're the woman Tyler has been seeing," Tyler's mother, Martha, said disapprovingly. "I didn't expect to find you in this house. Do you even pay rent?" "No, Martha, I don't pay rent," I explained. Tyler said the house is paid for, but we split all other bills evenly. I hoped this would clear things up, but Martha dismissed it. "Just because the house is paid for doesn't mean you can mooch off him. This is his house, not yours. Remember that for the rest of your life." The conversation got more uncomfortable, especially with Tyler's sister, Teresa, who glared at me more than she talked. When I asked about her life, she mentioned being married to a wealthy billionaire and brushed me off. During their visit, Tyler didn't support me and seemed to side with his family. Gabrielle and Martha kept criticizing me, making the visit hard. They disapproved of my spending on makeup and skincare, saying it was wrong since they thought I didn't contribute enough financially. Tyler's comments didn't help. He'd say things like, "Jessica was a struggling student when we first met," implying I depended on him a lot, which wasn't entirely true. He'd mention how he paid for everything early on because my job didn't cover my taste for luxury. I was shocked and reminded him we now split our bills equally. I explained that I had always lived simply, both before and during our relationship. Any luxury items I had were gifts from Tyler, which I often told him not to buy because they were too extravagant. Tyler justified his spending by saying his social status required him to give fancy gifts, showing that his generosity was more about impressing his friends than caring for me. After his family left, I confronted Tyler about how they treated me. Unfortunately, he brushed it off. "Don't take it to heart, Jessica. They meant well. You're overreacting," he said, dismissing my concerns. Despite my doubts, Tyler proposed 5 months later, and I happily accepted. We planned an engagement party and split the costs. I was running a small side business that Tyler knew about but never asked much about. For me, it was more of a fulfilling hobby than a big moneymaker. When it was time to organize our engagement party, I decided to treat myself a bit, and Tyler supported the idea. We shared the expenses, and I even covered plane tickets for my extended family. However, during the party, the criticisms resurfaced. "You shouldn't have spent so much on this party, Jessica," Martha said. "You're draining Tyler's account before you're even married. At this rate, you'll end up with a backyard wedding. I thought you were financially irresponsible, but it's worse than I thought." I stood my ground, saying the party was extravagant, but we both agreed to it. I paid my share, and it was actually Tyler's idea to include everyone. He insisted and didn't mind the expense. But the criticism continued. Martha accused me of manipulating Tyler into spending too much. Teresa chimed in, saying I should have been more considerate. Frustrated, I excused myself and went to the lawn to find some peace. There, I overheard Teresa and her husband Justin laughing at me. It felt like my engagement party was falling apart, and Tyler seemed unaware of his family's harsh judgments. Most of his extended family thought I was jobless and dependent on Tyler. My mom, noticing my distress, approached me and suggested I reconsider the engagement due to the ongoing mean comments from Tyler's family. After the party, I confronted Tyler about the situation. He brushed it off as a joke and expressed his love, saying financial matters didn't concern him. I told him I wanted to contribute more, especially towards rent, but he dismissed the idea. As we planned the wedding, the stress increased. Tyler's parents continued to criticize me, accusing me of bankrupting their son. Their constant scrutiny made the engagement period very challenging. I made it clear that everyone, including my mom, was helping with the wedding expenses. However, Martha accused me of taking advantage of Tyler and trying to deplete his bank account, branding me a gold digger. I tried to reassure Gabriel, saying, "Gabriel, I'm not asking for any financial help. We can finance the wedding ourselves." But despite my explanations, Teresa criticized the cost of my dress and makeup on the wedding day, even though my mother covered those expenses. The wedding ceremony went smoothly, but at the reception, Martha and Gabriel continued to criticize my spending habits, accusing me of financially exploiting Tyler. Despite their harsh words, I stayed silent to avoid ruining our special day. A few months later, Tyler got a significant promotion at work and wanted to celebrate with a grand family dinner. I was excited for him and decided to cover all the expenses myself. "Tyler, I want this dinner to be extraordinary. I'm so proud of you and want to celebrate your success," I told him. Tyler appreciated my gesture, and I told him my business was doing well. I had a stable income from my job and recently accessed a trust fund from my paternal grandfather. I planned the event meticulously to make it perfect. However, when his family arrived, they were unhappy with the arrangements. Despite positive feedback from other guests, his family seemed to disapprove of the celebration's lavishness. During the speeches, Martha stood up and, with her voice carrying across the room, began criticizing. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate my son. He's hardworking and generous, and he really deserves this promotion. Unfortunately, he made a poor choice in his partner. It's sad that he ended up with someone who acts like a gold digger. I wish he had seen her true nature earlier. Then he wouldn't have to work so hard to support her expensive lifestyle." Martha continued, her voice full of regret. "It's clear to everyone here that his wife has been very extravagant. From the engagement party to tonight's dinner, she has almost drained his accounts." Feeling hurt, I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Martha added, "Thank goodness we had Jessica sign a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. At least some of his assets are protected." She seemed relieved, saying it was good her son married someone who could at least look like a trophy wife. Tyler agreed with his mother. "I can't even afford to spend money on myself anymore. There's nothing left," he said. He called marrying me a mistake and compared me unfavorably to others. Shocked and frustrated, I finally spoke up. "Do you really think I'm a gold digger?" Tyler's response was cutting. "Your lifestyle is quite damaging to my bank account." Determined to clear things up, I said, "Since you all think I'm a gold digger, let me show you my bank balance." I revealed my financial independence to everyone present. The room fell silent in disbelief. Martha accused, "Did you steal my son's money?" Tyler added suspiciously, "She must have taken it from you." Frustrated but calm, I replied, "I don't need to steal money from your son. This is all from my efforts. I recently accessed a trust fund from my grandfather. I plan to use it to buy a bigger house for us, but now that seems unlikely." Despite my explanation, Tyler suggested we could still buy the house. "It'll be a wonderful gift," he said, but I was firm. "This is not happening. Your family has insulted me for too long, and you've never stood up for me. Instead, you've let them spread lies about me." Tyler tried to downplay the situation, saying I was overreacting. But I stood my ground. "No, I am not overreacting. Everyone here knows what your family has been calling me. They were here when you allowed them to insult me during our engagement party." Finally, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't tolerate the disrespect anymore. "I want a divorce," I said sternly. Tyler tried to plead with me, but my mom intervened. "You never defended my daughter. It's time she ends this toxic relationship, she declared. We left the party, leaving behind a crowd of shocked guests. I was resolute in my decision to leave Tyler and move on. My mom's support was unwavering as we exited, marking the end of a painful chapter in my life. After the confrontation, I went to our home, gathered my belongings, and stayed with my mom for solace. The next day, I contacted my cousin, who was a lawyer, to start the divorce process. With the prenuptial agreement in place, it was straightforward, so I didn't have to share my assets with Tyler. The situation escalated when Tyler and his family came to my mom's house, demanding to talk. My mom stood firm and told them to leave. Tyler kept trying to contact me, alternating between apologies and threats. I saved all the messages, ready to file a restraining order if needed. My mom's unwavering support gave me strength. Tyler even tried to confront me at work, but security escorted him out. I decided to leave my job, as my growing business meant I no longer needed it. I resigned that day, ready to move forward. A week later, I served Tyler the divorce papers at his workplace. He went to my old office only to find out I had resigned. My former colleague said he kept sending flowers and gifts to my mom's house, which we returned. The harassment made me consider relocating. With my mom's encouragement, I found a new house in the next state, a sanctuary away from my ex. As I awaited the finalization of the divorce, the judge ensured it was smooth thanks to the prenuptial agreement. During the 5 months of our separation, I focused on healing and preparing for a new chapter in my life. I settled into my new home and changed my number to avoid Tyler's messages. I heard Tyler's life was falling apart. He blamed his parents for our breakup and faced setbacks at work. His colleagues distanced themselves, and his seniors were unhappy with the negative publicity. His parents spread infidelity rumors, but they didn't gain traction. In contrast, my life began to flourish. I focused on my business and enjoyed my newfound freedom. I started dating again, cautiously, but remained hopeful about finding someone who truly valued me. Though Tyler caused me pain, overcoming the challenges made me stronger. I looked forward to a brighter future, confident in my resilience and aware of what I wanted in relationships and life.
My name is Patricia, and at 29, I believed I had found my soulmate, Keith. Our whirlwind romance led to marriage within a year. Keith, an accountant, is a tall man with laughter so infectious it could light up any room. I work in digital marketing, and painting is my weekend passion. While I've always been a meticulous planner, Keith's spontaneity seemed to balance me perfectly, or so I thought. The day after our wedding, our living room was a delightful mess of gifts and cards, remnants of our celebration. That's when Keith's parents, Judy and Logan, came over. Our quick engagement hadn't left much time to get to know them, but they had seemed pleasant enough during the wedding. As we unwrapped gifts together, I noticed Judy and Logan were unusually interested in certain items. "Is that a crystal vase?" Judy asked, picking up a sparkling piece from my Aunt Kelly. She examined it closely, clearly enamored. "Yes, isn't it beautiful?" I replied, hoping to divert her attention from laying claim to it. Judy set it aside with a casual suggestion, "This would look wonderful at our house." Keith, engrossed in unwrapping some intricate kitchen tools, laughed it off. "Mom, that's our wedding gift," he said, treating the moment as a joke. "Oh, come on, it'll just gather dust here, we'll use it," Logan added, grinning. Trying to keep the peace, I interjected, "Actually, I was thinking it would look great in our foyer." Judy's expression shifted slightly, her tone becoming more pointed. "Patricia, you need to learn to share, we're family now, and families help each other." Sensing the tension, Keith quickly stepped in. "Let's not worry about it, we've got plenty of gifts." I nodded, swallowing my frustration, but the feeling lingered. Strangers were staking claims in my new life, and Keith seemed unwilling to stop them. The first year of our marriage flew by, and soon it was time for our anniversary. Wanting to make it special, I booked a table at Chez Louis, a quaint restaurant we both loved. I even invited Judy and Logan, hoping to show they were valued. When we arrived, they were already seated, scanning the menu. "This place is fancy," Judy remarked, her eyes darting to the elegant decor. As we ordered, Judy didn't hesitate to pick the most extravagant items on the menu. "We'll have the lobster and filet mignon," she announced, her tone casual. Logan added, "And a bottle of your finest wine, of course." I forced a smile, keeping the mood light. "Quite the celebration, huh?" Keith shrugged, brushing it off. "It's a special night, let's not worry about the cost." as the meal went on. Their indulgence overshadowed what was meant to be our moment. When the hefty bill arrived, Keith winced briefly before paying without complaint. As we left, Judy linked arms with me. "Patricia, this was just lovely. We should do this every year." Thanksgiving arrived, and with it, the holiday season. Keith and I decorated our home with cozy autumn hues and early Christmas lights. One evening, as we hung decorations, Keith chuckled at a text. "My parents are ahead of the game, they've sent their Christmas wish list," he said, handing me his phone. The list was shocking: high-end electronics, designer clothes, luxury items. "They can't be serious," I said, my voice betraying disbelief. "They like the good stuff," Keith replied with a shrug. The holidays approached, and I settled on a practical gift for Judy and Logan, a nice coffee maker. In return, they gave me a modest set of scented candles. Meanwhile, they gifted Keith a sophisticated drone, further cementing an unspoken expectation: we were to give generously and receive modestly. Though I stayed silent to avoid tension, the imbalance gnawed at me. It wasn't until my quarterly bonus arrived, larger than expected, that I saw an opportunity to bring joy back into our relationship. Keith and I had always dreamed of a romantic getaway to Venice, and now I could make it happen. Over dinner that evening, I revealed the surprise. Keith's face lit up with excitement, a reminder of the love that had brought us together. I hadn't seen Venice in years. "Really? That's amazing, babe," Keith exclaimed, rising from his seat to kiss me. His excitement lit up the room, and for a moment, it felt like nothing could dim our happiness. But then, his phone rang. It was his mother. I tried to tune out their conversation, but snippets floated toward me. Keith's initial enthusiasm was unmistakable as he shared our plans. I wished he hadn't. I wanted this to be just ours, at least for a little while. But as the call went on, his expression changed. The joy in his voice dimmed, replaced by something heavier. I know, you've always wanted to go," he said quietly. When he hung up, Keith turned to me, his face somber. "They want to come with us," he said, as though seeking my approval. I froze, my fork suspended midair. "To Venice? With us?" I asked, carefully keeping my voice steady. Keith nodded, his tone tentative. "They've never been and always wanted to go. Let's take them." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. "But it's supposed to be our trip, Keith." "Ours," I said, the tightness in my chest rising. He hesitated, then sighed. "I know, but they're getting older, and I feel bad. They've done so much for me." I thought of all the times we'd bent over backward for them, the lopsided gift exchanges, the extravagant anniversary dinners, the endless compromises, but this wasn't about them. "This is our time," I said firmly. "We can plan a trip with them another time. This bonus, it's for us." Keith sighed again, a deep, frustrated sound. "They won't understand. You know how they are. And you know how much this means to me," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "I want us to enjoy this together, just like we planned." He fell silent for a long moment before finally nodding. "Okay, we'll tell them some other time might work better." But when the time came for that conversation, Keith faltered. "Maybe we can all go together next year," he suggested over speakerphone. Judy's response was instant and sharp. "Why next year? We can afford it now," she said, her voice laced with disappointment. I couldn't hold back any longer. "Because this trip is for us, Judy," I said firmly. "Keith and I need this time together." There was a beat of silence before she retorted, her tone icy. "Well, that's very selfish of you, Patricia, very selfish indeed." After the call, tension seeped into every corner of our home. Keith withdrew, leaving early for work and returning late. Conversations became brief and mechanical. "Dinner's in the oven," I'd say when he walked through the door, my voice echoing in the silence. "Thanks," he'd reply, his tone hollow, as though the words carried no weight. I missed him. I missed us. I yearned for the easy laughter we used to share, the nights we spent dreaming about our future on the couch. Now, it felt like an invisible wall had risen between us, transparent but impenetrable. Every attempt I made to reach him felt like shouting through thick glass. One particularly difficult evening, we sat across from each other at the dinner table. The only sound was the clinking of his fork against the plate. I cleared my throat, the noise startling even me. "Keith, we can't go on like this," I said softly, my voice trembling. "We need to talk about what happened. We can't let this silence become our new normal." He didn't look up right away, but after a moment, he set his fork down and met my eyes. "What do you want me to say, Patricia?" he asked, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "I want to understand why this is hitting you so hard," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "Why does it feel like you're choosing them over me?" Keith sighed, folding his hands on the table in front of him. "They're my parents, Patricia. They've dreamed about going to Venice their whole lives." "And what about our dreams, our plans?" I shot back, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Doesn't that matter to you?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation I had come to recognize too well. I know, he said, his tone conflicted. For a fleeting moment, I saw the man I married, torn but not indifferent. "It's just, they've always been there for me. I feel obligated, you know?" "But where does that leave us, Keith?" I pressed, leaning forward to catch his gaze. "What about our marriage?" The silence that followed was deafening, each second stretching longer than the last. In that pause, a wave of doubt washed over me. Maybe we weren't as strong as I had believed. Maybe our foundation was less rock and more sand, eroded by the tide of his parents' constant needs and wants. "It's supposed to be us against the world, Keith," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. "Not me against you and them." He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. "I know, Patricia, I don't know how to make everyone happy." "That's just it," I said, a sudden clarity washing over me. "We can't always make everyone happy, but we made vows to each other, Keith. Doesn't that count for something?" He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the table before meeting mine. "It does. It counts for a lot." The rest of the meal passed in contemplative silence, not the strained quiet we had grown accustomed to, but something different. It felt like my words had either planted a seed or watered one that had been dormant within Keith for far too long. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, but it brought no warmth to our home. I awoke to an unsettling quiet, the other side of the bed untouched, the emptiness of the house wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, stifling in its stillness. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I reached for my phone, bracing myself for the usual absence of messages. Instead, my screen was flooded with notifications. A lump formed in my throat as I opened them, one by one. Airline tickets, hotel bookings, all charged to my account. My hands trembled as I read the details. The timestamps showed the transactions had been made during the early hours of the morning. While I slept, the flight had already departed. Keith and his parents were on their way to Venice, the trip that was supposed to be ours, financed by the bonus I had worked so hard to earn. Disbelief turned to anger, then to a profound sense of betrayal. The man I had trusted implicitly had used that trust against me. The evidence was there in stark black and white, glaring at me from the screen. With shaking hands, I dialed his number, even though I knew he wouldn't answer, not with the time difference, and certainly not after our last argument. The cheerful beep of the voicemail was a cruel contrast to the storm inside me. "Keith," I began, my voice low and trembling, "I saw the charges. You took your parents to Venice using my bonus. I don't even know what to say, but I hope it's worth it. I hope it's worth everything." The house felt colder after the call, its walls closing in as silence enveloped me, but inside, a storm of emotions raged, hurt, anger, and the undeniable sting of betrayal. With a resolute heart, I opened my laptop. One by one, I began canceling the hotel reservations, the return flights, and every other part of the trip tied to my finances. Each cancellation felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a small victory in the face of his betrayal. I felt my former life slipping away, the future I had envisioned dissolving before my eyes. Once everything was undone, I took decisive steps to sever financial ties. I contacted the bank and removed Keith's access to my accounts, each click a mix of fear and liberation. The man I had married, the family I had tried so hard to integrate into, were now strangers. Strangers who had exploited my generosity instead of cherishing it. With mechanical precision, I packed my bags. Each item tucked away was a reminder of a dream now shelved. There was no going back, no apology could repair the breach Keith's actions had caused. He had made his choice, and in doing so, he had determined my path. The wedding ring, once a symbol of our love, now felt cold and heavy in my palm. I left it on the counter, its sparkle mocking the morning light. With one final glance at the life I was leaving behind, I shut the door on what was never truly a home. By late afternoon, I was driving away, my car filled with clothes and essentials. Each item reminded me of how swiftly my life had turned. My phone buzzed with messages, one from Keith, several from his mother. I pulled over, knowing their words would only strengthen my resolve. Keith's message was brief. "Patricia, Please, we need to talk about this, can't we discuss it? His words felt hollow, almost insulting in their simplicity. I started typing a response but stopped. No words could bridge the gulf between us now. His mother's messages were a mix of confusion and attempts to justify their actions. They, too, fell on deaf ears. As I drove toward a new beginning, I turned off my phone, leaving their desperate messages unanswered. They were halfway around the world enjoying Venice, a trip funded by deceit. They could sort out their accommodations without me. My first stop was the bank. The manager, a compassionate middle-aged woman, greeted me warmly. I need to ensure my husband can no longer access my accounts, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She nodded with understanding. Let's make sure you're fully protected. When I left, my accounts were secure, and I felt a renewed sense of control. I drove to my sister Isabella's house, the only place I knew I could truly relax. She opened the door before I even knocked, pulling me into a comforting embrace. Patricia, I've been so worried, she said, her concern palpable. Over tea at her kitchen table, I explained everything. You deserve so much better, Isabella said firmly. I know, I replied, that's why I'm not going back. I've cancelled everything. I'm done. Isabella squeezed my hand, her face a mix of anger and pride. Good for you. What's your plan now? I looked around her familiar kitchen, a sense of relief washing over me. I'm filing for divorce. I can't stay married to someone who has so little respect for me. Over the next few days, Isabella helped me unpack and plan my next steps. The mundane tasks were grounding, a small comfort amid the chaos, but the quiet didn't last. One afternoon, Keith's parents showed up at Isabella's doorstep. Their faces were tight with anger, and they barged past a stunned Isabella. You've got some nerve, Patricia, his mother spat. You ruined our family vacation. You're just a greedy, selfish woman. Isabella stepped in front of me, her stance protective. That's enough. You're not coming into my house to insult my sister, she said firmly. The argument escalated, catching the attention of neighbors peeking out their windows. Isabella stood her ground, threatening to call the police if they didn't leave. They finally stormed off, leaving behind a palpable tension. Despite the confrontation, I felt an unwavering clarity. I was done. The divorce process was sterile and procedural. Each signature severed another tie, loosening the chains that had held me bound. When it was over, I stepped out of the courthouse, the air fresh and a gentle breeze playing with my hair. Isabella was waiting, her embrace tight and supportive. You did it, Patricia, she said, pride resonating in her voice. Keith's messages continued for a while, apologies, please, and eventually anger. I left them unread, floating in the digital void. As I moved forward, I rented a modest, sunlit apartment and began to rebuild. Plants adorned the shelves, books filled the corners, and new memories started to take root. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, I deleted Keith's number. It was a small but cathartic gesture. I was free to heal, grow, and, most importantly, to be unapologetically myself. With each passing day, I embraced my new life and the endless possibilities ahead.
Hi, I'm Hazel. I'm 32 and 9 months pregnant with my first baby. Life has been tough lately, and I want to share my story in case it helps anyone else who's going through something similar. I live in San Francisco with my husband, Michael. He's 34 and works as a software engineer. Even though our life might look perfect from the outside, it's actually very difficult. Michael doesn't support me emotionally or help around the house. Most weekends, he's at his parents' house, leaving me to handle everything on my own. Even though I'm pregnant, I love photography, and taking photos of my daily life gives me some happiness. But Michael's lack of support and constant criticism often overshadow that joy. One night, Michael came home and demanded that I go buy beer from the store. I was tired and felt uncared for, but I agreed to go. On the way, I felt hurt and wondered why he couldn't go himself. But I knew arguing with him would only make things worse. When I came back, Michael barely noticed my effort and kept criticizing me. His words hurt a lot, but I tried not to cry. Our relationship had been getting worse, and his behavior was becoming more hurtful. The next morning, Michael acted like nothing happened. He was cheerful and didn't acknowledge the previous night. I decided to cook a special dinner to make things better. I spent the whole day preparing his favorite meal, but when he came home drunk, he insulted me and questioned my worth as a wife and mother. I felt even more isolated and unsupported as my due date got closer. Michael wanted to go on a family trip with his parents, and even though I was worried about traveling so close to my delivery, he ignored my concerns. His parents, who often criticized me, agreed with him. On the day of the trip, my water broke, and I was scared. I told Michael we needed to go to the hospital right away, but instead of helping, he kicked me out of the car, angry that I might mess it up. I felt completely abandoned. Thankfully, our neighbor Na saw me in trouble. Na, who was married to Michael's boss, rushed to help and called an ambulance. She stayed with me at the hospital and offered comfort while I gave birth. Her support was crucial during such a vulnerable time. In the hospital, as I held my baby, I couldn't stop thinking about Michael's neglect and his family's criticism. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Na became a close friend and supported me through everything. She even told her husband about what happened, which was important later on. A video of Michael kicking me out of the car went viral, and the public backlash was huge. Michael lost his job, struggled to find new work, and faced a lot of public shaming. His behavior had severe consequences, and his reputation was damaged. Meanwhile, I found support from my parents and Na. They encouraged me to think about my future and my baby's well-being. I started considering divorce, realizing it was the best option for us. The strong evidence and public pressure made the divorce process easier, and Michael and his family reluctantly agreed to the terms. After my baby was born, my life began to change for the better. I knew I had to make decisions that were right for me and my child. Michael's behavior had become unacceptable, and I had to think about our future. Na continued to support me, visiting the hospital, bringing meals, and offering encouragement. Her husband, Mark, who is the CFO at Michael's former company, also supported me. It was comforting to know they both understood how serious the situation was. After I left the hospital, I moved in with my parents. They are older but very supportive and welcomed me and my baby with open arms. Their home in San Francisco became a safe and comforting place for us. I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for their care and love. As I settled in, I thought a lot about how I ended up here. The viral video of Michael kicking me out of the car had drawn a lot of attention, and the backlash against him was intense. He lost his job, had trouble finding new work, and faced a lot of public shame. Knowing that others saw his true behavior was a small comfort, but it didn't lessen the pain of his betrayal. Despite the chaos, I found peace in my new routine. My parents were wonderful, helping with the baby and giving me emotional support. I also grew closer to Na. She visited often, and our talks became a source of strength for me. She shared her own experiences and gave me advice, becoming a true friend. During this time, I began to think about my legal options. Na suggested talking to a lawyer about divorce. It was a scary thought, but I knew it was necessary for my baby's future. I found a compassionate lawyer who understood my situation. We discussed the details of my marriage, and I showed the evidence of Michael's neglect and abuse. The divorce process began, and it was relatively straightforward due to the public pressure and the viral video. Michael and his family had little choice but to agree to the terms. The process was a relief, though emotionally draining. Meanwhile, I started finding joy in small things again. My passion for photography was rekindled, and I took many pictures of my baby, capturing precious moments. These photos were a reminder of the new life I was building. One day, while walking with Na, she introduced me to her son, Jake. He was around my age, and we quickly became friends. Jake was kind and understanding, qualities I had missed in my relationship with Michael. He often helped me with the baby and offered to babysit, giving me some much-needed time to myself. Our friendship grew, and it started to turn into something more. Jake made me laugh and reminded me that there are good people in the world. My parents also liked him and were happy to see me smile again. It was a slow process, but I was beginning to heal. Na and Mark were incredibly supportive during this time. They helped me with single motherhood and the emotional aftermath of my divorce. Mark gave practical advice, while Na provided a listening ear and warmth. Despite the challenges, I felt empowered, taking control of my life and making decisions for me and my baby. The pain from Michael's neglect and abuse was still there, but it no longer defined me. I was stronger than I had realized. As I adjusted to life as a new mother and dealt with the fallout from my marriage, I found strength in the support around me. My parents, Na and Jake, were my constants, helping me through the toughest days. The divorce was moving forward, though it was emotionally taxing. Michael's family denied his behavior and tried to blame me for everything. Even though it was hard dealing with their criticism, I knew I had to stay strong for my baby. One morning, my lawyer called to tell me that Michael wanted to discuss the divorce settlement. I was nervous but agreed to meet if our lawyers were present. Facing Michael again made me anxious, but it was necessary. The meeting was tense. Michael looked worn out and bitter, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong. His words hurt, but I reminded myself that he was the one who had abandoned me. Our lawyers helped keep the discussion civil. Michael agreed to the terms, including child support and visitation rights. I felt a huge relief as this marked the end of a painful chapter in my life. When I got home, my parents were eager to hear about the meeting. Sharing the details with them felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. My mother hugged me and said, "You're so strong, Hazel. We're proud of you." Their support was a great comfort. My relationship with Jake continued to grow. He was a positive presence in my life, and one evening he told me, "Hazel, you're amazing. You've been through so much, and yet you're still standing. I admire your strength." His words touched me deeply. For the first time in a long time, I felt appreciated and seen. Our bond grew stronger, and soon, our friendship blossomed into something more. Jake became a loving part of my baby's life, and my parents were happy to see me happy. However, not everything was easy. Michael's parents kept interfering, calling and demanding to see their grandchild. They refused to accept the damage Michael had caused and acted as if nothing had changed. Dealing with their criticism was exhausting, but I stood firm, setting boundaries to protect my peace. One day, Na invited me over for coffee. We sat in her warm and welcoming kitchen, and she asked how I was doing. I told her about my struggles with Michael's parents and the difficulties of being a single mother. She listened carefully and then said, "Hazel, you've come so far. Don't let anyone take away your peace. You have every right to protect your happiness and your child's well-being." Her words were empowering. Na had become more than just a neighbor. She was a mentor and a true friend. Her husband Mark also helped by advising me on legal matters and explaining my rights. As the months went by, I grew stronger and more confident. I began taking on freelance photography projects, something I had always wanted to do. It felt great to pursue my passion and support my baby. Each photo I took was a sign of the new life I was building. My relationship with Jake continued to grow. He was patient, kind, and truly cared for me and my baby. One evening, while watching the sunset, he looked at me and said, "Hazel, I love you. I know it's been tough, but I want to be there for you and for both of you every step of the way." Tears came to my eyes as I realized how far I had come from feeling abandoned and neglected. I was now surrounded by love and support. I looked at Jake and said, "I love you too. Thank you for being here, for everything." After months of struggle and resilience, my life began to improve. The divorce was finalized and I was finally free from the toxic relationship that had held me back for so long. The day the papers were signed was bittersweet. I felt a sense of loss but also an overwhelming relief. My lawyer, who had been a steady support, said, "This is a new beginning, Hazel. You're doing the right thing for yourself and your child." With the divorce behind me, I focused on creating a stable and happy life for my baby and me. My freelance photography work started to grow, and I found joy in capturing special moments for others. Each project brought me closer to independence and self-fulfillment. Jake continued to be a constant source of support and love. He understood my past and respected my journey. One evening, while having dinner with my parents, Jake proposed to me. It was a simple, heartfelt moment. "Hazel, will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes full of hope. I didn't hesitate. "Yes, Jake, I will," I replied, tears of happiness streaming down my face. My parents were overjoyed, and my heart felt full. Na and Mark were thrilled for us as well. Na, who had been there from the start, gave me a tight hug and said, "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Hazel." I was grateful every day for the unexpected turn our relationship had taken and for the support of everyone around me. Michael and his parents kept trying to interfere, but I stood my ground and set clear boundaries. With Mark's legal advice and support, I made sure they respected our space. Their criticism no longer affected me. I was stronger and more confident, ready to protect my peace and my child's well-being. As time went on, I settled into a new routine. My days were filled with photography sessions, joyful moments with Jake, and the simple pleasures of watching my child grow. Jake was a wonderful father figure, and our home was full of love and happiness. One day, while sitting in Na's garden, we reflected on how much had changed. "You've come so far, Hazel. I'm so proud of you," she said, smiling. I looked around at the beautiful flowers and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Na. Your friendship means everything to me," I replied. My past, marked by neglect and emotional abuse, had transformed into a story of empowerment and independence. I had found my voice and strength. My life was now surrounded by supportive people who loved me for who I was. To anyone listening, I want to say, no matter how dark and difficult things may seem, there is always hope. Surround yourself with those who uplift and support you. Take it one step at a time and never forget your worth. Empowerment and happiness are within your reach. Thank you for following my journey.
You need to heal your hand quickly, or it will get worse. I didn't understand why my husband George took me on a fishing trip in a rowboat and let me drift away while he filmed me laughing on his phone. I thought maybe he wanted to make up after an argument. But as I drifted alone, scared and cold, I realized his true intentions. Thankfully, a man rescued me, saving my life. My name is Carol, and I'm 38 years old. I live with my husband George, who is 3 years older. We used to work together at the same company, but in different departments. We didn't interact much until George started visiting my department for no reason. Eventually, he asked me out to dinner, surprising me. We grew closer and got married 2 years ago, much to the surprise of everyone, especially my parents. They were overjoyed at our wedding. After living with my parents, George and I decided to get our own place, not too far from my parents' house. I'm home. Welcome back. Dinner is ready. Is that curry I smell? Yes, it is. Let's dig in quickly. Awesome, your curry is the best. I usually take care of the housework because I finish work on time and don't have to do overtime. Even when I lived with my parents, I enjoyed cooking and cleaning, so it's no trouble for me. But on weekends or when George gets off work early, he takes over. Our life as newlyweds was going really well without any problems. But about a year and a half into our marriage, things started to go downhill. One day, while we were eating, George sighed and said, "You're lucky, Carol, not having to work overtime." George is a manager and has been really busy lately, working extra hours. Worried about him, I said, "Well, my job is more routine, but you have so much responsibility because you're trusted, George. That's impressive." But my words seemed to upset him. "What do you mean by that? Don't praise me if you don't understand. We've had arguments before, but this was the first time I saw George so tired. Not knowing what else to say, I just said sorry, and George stormed off to his room without finishing dinner. I knew George was tired, so I didn't argue back, but I was surprised by his reaction. I heard his department was starting a new project, so I hoped things would get better once he wasn't so busy. But instead, our relationship got worse over the next few days. A week later, I had to stay late at work unexpectedly. I need to prepare some urgent documents by tomorrow, which might keep me at the office until after George gets back. Feeling a bit uneasy, I decided to text George just in case. I had to do overtime at work today. George, if you're not working late, could you handle dinner? Or should we eat separately tonight? Sorry for any inconvenience. It had been a while since I reached out to George like this. Remembering our last argument, I added sorry to the end of the message. But all I got was a red receipt with no reply. When I got home, George was eating what looked like a meal from a convenience store, and he didn't respond when I said, "I'm home," showing he was in a bad mood. Sorry about dinner, work kept me longer than expected. Trying to ease the tension, George interrupted me. "Do you think it's okay to work late when I come home this tired? Are you still upset about what I said earlier?" Trying to start a fight with good intentions? I was surprised by how quickly things escalated. I asked again, "So you think I'm pretending to work late just to bother you, or I'm not finishing my work because I'm lazy?" His words stung. I really had to stay late at work. This has happened before, you know. What's gotten into you? I couldn't bear George's accusatory tone any longer. I snapped back. I work hard every day too. I shouldn't have to defend myself against these accusations. But George ignored my words. I'm already stressed from work. I couldn't bear to have this tension at home, especially when I was exhausted myself. My true feelings slipped out, albeit quietly, but George noticed and didn't let it slide. Then just quit your job, he suggested, leaving me speechless. It's ridiculous for you, Carol, who can't even manage housework properly, to be working. After all, I'm the one paying for this apartment. You don't really need the money, do you? His logic seemed completely off base. Feeling my frustration rise, I unintentionally raised my voice. How can you say that? I do take care of the house, and except for the days I work late, I handle everything at home. But lately on weekends, the cleaning hasn't been up to par compared to when we first got married. Seeing dust in the corners of the floor frustrates me. I didn't know what else to do. I felt like I was about to burst into tears. You'd have more time to focus on housework if you quit your job, and it would be easier for you too. I'll even talk to management for you, I replied. I don't think we should be discussing this right now. I decided to pause the conversation to give it some thought. I enjoy my job and don't want to quit, but perhaps if I supported George as a full-time homemaker, we could go back to being the happy couple we used to be. It wouldn't be wise to make such a big decision hastily. Unable to bear the tension at home, I went outside. Realizing I hadn't bought dinner, I decided to bike to the supermarket near the subway station. Riding my bike in the cold night air, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. What went wrong? Suddenly, I heard a loud horn honking from behind me and bright headlights approached quickly. Instinctively, I stopped. The next thing I knew, I was lying under bright lights and a white ceiling. Opening my eyes, I saw my parents' faces in front of me, exclaiming, "She's awake." Next to them sat George, his expression unreadable. I couldn't move my arm, and my fingers felt numb. Both of my arms were wrapped in circular casts. "This means you ran a red light on your bike," the doctor explained. I remembered now. I was on my way to the supermarket when the accident happened, but I couldn't recall if the light was red or green when I crossed. The driver was shocked too, but called an ambulance for me. The gravity of what I had done hit me, and I suddenly felt even worse. But why are Mom and Dad here? George was contacted first, and then he informed them. George gave a forced smile to my parents. Understandably, after what had happened, it was awkward for me too. "I'm really glad George was there for you," my parents thanked George, who responded with a polite, "No problem," but his forced smile didn't seem sincere. I ended up spending the night in the hospital due to the lateness of the hour. However, after undergoing various tests the next morning that showed no issues, I was discharged the following day. The doctor instructed me to rest and avoid water-related chores and housework because the casts couldn't be removed. When I got home, which happened to be on my day off, I found George lounging on the sofa with a smug look. "You really messed up running that red light, but now you have no choice but to quit your job," he said without showing any concern. George lay there, staring at me mockingly. I felt powerless to respond, and to be honest, he was right. With casts on both hands, I couldn't even type properly on a computer. Faced with the decision of taking a long break or quitting altogether, I chose to resign, thinking it might improve my relationship with George. But leaving my job didn't magically fix things between us. Instead, it seemed to make him even more dissatisfied. He'd come home just to criticize me, using it as an outlet for his frustrations. During one of my worst days, George surprisingly suggested, "Why don't we go out together? It's been a while." I was suspicious of his sudden change in behavior, but George seemed to be in a good mood that day, and his overtime seemed to be decreasing. Maybe he was finally feeling less stressed. Perhaps today we could finally patch things up. Feeling more hopeful than I had in a long time, I joined George on an outing. We went to the beach, a place we used to visit together. "Here, you can fish in a rowboat," George suggested, pointing to the safe fishing area where beginners could easily fish from rowboats. This spot held special memories for me. Although I had only been here a few times, it was meaningful because George had helped me overcome my fear of the sea by teaching me how to fish. I still remembered the fun times we had here. "It's not scary, it's nostalgic," I said to George, who simply replied, "Yeah." Having a normal conversation without any snark or arguments felt incredibly refreshing and genuinely joyful after so long. After renting a boat, we successfully got on board. "Here, Carol," George said, offering his hand to help me aboard, just like old times. I carefully grasped his hand to get into the boat, being extra cautious since I couldn't use my hands to stabilize myself. Sitting down, I was reminded of our dates before we got married, which made me happy. Now we can finally get back to how we were, I thought, hoping this outing could mend our relationship. I looked at George, who then flashed a mischievous grin and kicked the boat off. "Huh!" I exclaimed, but my voice was drowned out by the sound of the kick. With a sudden jolt, the boat shot out to sea, quickly drifting away from the dock where George stood. Even though I wasn't rowing, George took out his phone and filmed me, laughing and taunting, "You better heal that hand fast, or it's going to be bad." In that moment, I realized I had been tricked. I blamed myself. I had thought that if George's workload decreased and I did the housework perfectly, we could reconcile. But I was wrong. This was George's true nature. Realizing this, I felt frustrated, ashamed, and sad, and tears started flowing. Sniffling and breathing in the sea breeze, I felt the fear of being alone at sea overwhelm me. I just wanted to go home. As I sat there, eyes closed, trying to push through the fear, a man's voice startled me. "Are you okay? You're about to drift out of the safe area, and are those casts on your arms?" There was a man, likely a father, and a boy who looked a lot like him, but when our eyes met, the man exclaimed, "Oh, aren't you Carol?" with a gentle voice. I remembered him. He was Matt, George's colleague who had come to our wedding. That meant the boy next to him must be his son, Mark, who had grown a lot since our wedding. I didn't notice. "What happened to you in that state? Weren't you in a bicycle accident?" Matt asked, clearly confused. "Yes, I was, and now I'm stuck here, unable to row. All because George put me on this boat," I explained. Matt seemed taken aback, understandably so. Being put on a boat by one's husband and left adrift at sea sounded like something out of a drama. "Let's call for help," Matt said, raising his voice and calling out to the boat rental staff. Thanks to him, I was saved, while Mark played on the beach. Through tears, I told Matt everything about George, how he had treated me, and how I ended up adrift at sea today. Gradually, Matt's face grew pained, and he cried with me. "It must have been hard," he said softly, offering a comforting word. I nodded, tears streaming down my face once again. Then Matt made a suggestion. "I've been having my own thoughts about George recently. Would you let me handle it?" After our conversation, Matt drove me home in his car. During the ride, Mark talked a lot, providing me with a genuinely enjoyable time for the first time in a while. I dreaded coming home, but it was unavoidable. With trepidation, I opened the front door to find George lounging carelessly in the living room. He smirked at me and said, "Wow, you're back. Always lucky with survival, huh?" Unable to find the energy to respond, I ignored him and went straight to my room to get ready for bed. The next morning, I didn't make breakfast for George and stayed in my room. With my hands in this condition, I couldn't cook properly anyway. But even before the boat incident, I had tried so hard to please George, even buying delicious bread. Now, all those efforts felt pointless to me. I didn't give George much thought throughout the day, and before I knew it, night had fallen. The sound of the front door opening signaled an unusually early return for George. He barged into my room and started yelling abruptly, "Hey. It was you, wasn't it?" Confused, I asked what he meant. George's voice grew louder as he accused me, "Don't play dumb with me. You're the one who told my company. What's going on?" I remained unfazed by his words, replying, "I don't know what you're talking about, but whatever trouble you're having at work doesn't involve me anymore. After all, I'm not even working there anymore." I waved off George's accusations, feeling no need to cater to him anymore. Frustrated, George stormed out of the house. The real shock came 3 days later when George, who hadn't returned home during that time, walked through the front door looking as pale as a ghost. "Carol, what should I do?" he muttered, looking lifeless as he shuffled into the room where I was relaxing. "What happened?" I asked. "I've been fired from my job," he said. "Oh, really?" I replied indifferently, watching as George collapsed to the floor. I had finally made it to manager. Despite his despair, I felt no sympathy for George because I knew this was coming. This was what Matt had hinted at when he said, "Leave it to me," during our conversation by the sea. According to Matt, George's behavior at work had taken a turn for the worse recently. He was mistreating his subordinates, dumping his work on others, falsely claiming overtime, and even harassing a new female employee, among other things. However, there was no solid proof of his actions, leaving them in a difficult situation. Despite being colleagues who were promoted to manager around the same time from different departments, Matt struggled to come to terms with George's behavior. But seeing how upset I was by George's actions, Matt felt compelled to take action. He suggested I check George's computer, suspecting it held evidence of his wrongdoing since George always took his laptop home. Matt couldn't investigate it himself. I knew George's laptop password. After safely returning from the sea, I pretended to go to sleep, waited for George to fall asleep, then checked and extracted the data from his laptop, which I then sent to Matt. I never expected things to unfold so quickly. Matt, the star of the advertising department, had acted swiftly and decisively. Standing up, I went to my drawer and retrieved something specific. Then, speaking slowly, I said, "I'm sorry to bring this up while you're feeling down, but I have something important to say." George looked at me with a puzzled expression, resembling a discarded puppy. After taking a deep breath, I continued, "I want a divorce." I finally voiced my decision, handing him the filled-out divorce papers. George's face shifted from confusion to a mix of anger and sadness as he looked at me. "Why do you want divorce? Can't you show a little compassion, especially when I'm feeling so low?" he pleaded. His words left me stunned, almost tempted to throw them right back at him. "I'm grateful to you for revealing your true nature, and I've already discussed this with my family," I stated firmly. This wasn't just bravado. After my ordeal at sea, I had indeed gone back home and talked with my parents. That night, Matt messaged me saying, "George might come crying to you in about 3 days. It's up to you, Carol, what to do next." Reflecting on my options, I decided to confide in my parents. I laid everything out for them, holding nothing back, including the terrifying experience of being adrift at sea in a boat I couldn't row. As I recounted the events, the guilt I had been suppressing and the emotions I had bottled up overwhelmed me, and I cried. My parents, who had held George in high regard, were deeply shocked by what I revealed. However, after hearing my story, they apologized for my pain and encouraged me to proceed with the divorce. Though I had been considering it, their support helped solidify my decision. When I shared my decision with George, he paled and eventually broke down, pleading, "Please don't leave me. I can't bear to lose you now." Despite this desperate plea, my resolve remained firm. "You should have realized before putting me on that boat," I told George. He deflated, sitting motionless on the floor. In the past, I might have comforted him, reassuring him that everything would be okay. But now I felt nothing. My love and feelings for George had long been discarded in the sea along with that fishing boat. "The divorce is final. I won't be your convenience anymore," I declared firmly, my pent-up frustration fueling my words. With that, I left George behind, motionless on the floor. I grabbed a backpack with just a few belongings I had packed the night before and left the house. The night air was cool and I felt refreshingly clear-headed as I made my way back to my parents' home. Despite George's continued pleas to stay together, I proceeded with the divorce through a lawyer recommended by my father. In just a few days, George lost everything, sinking into depression and eventually returning to his parents' house, where even his mother seemed to have lost patience with him. His mother was entirely on my side, repeatedly apologizing for her son's foolishness. I didn't have much affection for George, but I had a soft spot for his mother, which made the situation unfortunate. I've heard he's now unemployed, staying at his parents' home. It's sad to see how he could be so harsh to others yet unable to handle adversity himself. After successfully ending our relationship and receiving support throughout the process, I expressed my gratitude to Matt. Once my arms healed, I returned to work and realized how much I actually enjoyed it. I used to spend each day accommodating George, but now I cherish doing what I love, immersing myself in my work and feeling fulfilled every day. I'm eager to start anew, valuing myself and navigating life with care.
You'll be fine going to the hospital alone, right? I swear I'll send you straight to hell. My name is Lisa. and I'm currently 9 months pregnant. It's my first time giving birth, so while I'm filled with anxiety, I feel truly blessed about welcoming a new member into our family. My husband, David, is a white-collar worker and has weekends off. However, he doesn't offer much support around the house or help with shopping. This is because he usually goes back to his parents' home on weekends. David has a deep bond with his in-laws, and since their home is nearby, he spends almost every weekend there without any specific reason. Since becoming pregnant, I've been cautious about lifting heavy objects. For instance, when buying heavy items like rice, understanding friends often help out. My daily routine starts by waking up early, preparing breakfast for David, and seeing him off to work. Afterward, I do the cleaning and laundry, and then head out for any necessary shopping. Once I return home, I start prepping for dinner. Only after finishing these tasks can I finally have some relaxation time. Since taking maternity leave, I've taken up a new hobby, blogging. Every day, I write a diary accompanied by photos I take, such as meals, the blue sky, flowers blooming in the garden, and more. Many friends and acquaintances leave comments, and these moments of journaling have become small daily joys for me. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, my husband returned home as usual. He carelessly placed his bag and jacket on the sofa, and I tidied them up, hanging them on a coat hanger. "Welcome back. I made hamburgers for dinner. I'm going to take a bath," I said. Responding curtly, he headed straight for the bathroom. 3 years have passed since we got married, and there has been little kindness or consideration from him. I occasionally wonder if this is truly what a marital relationship should be like. But I've resigned myself to it. When David returned in his pajamas, I handed him a drink. "Where's the beer?" he asked, glancing at the bar. I hinted, "Sorry, I forgot to buy it today. I'll get some tomorrow." "Seriously? Go to the convenience store now." His demeanor changed immediately, and he spoke with evident anger. I was irritated. Why was he asking his pregnant wife to do this? If you want it so badly, why don't you go get it yourself? It's hard for me to move around with this big belly. At that moment, he became even angrier and started shouting, "You're the one who forgot to buy it. It's your job to fix that mistake. Just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you get special treatment." My mother always said it's important to keep moving for the sake of health. Knowing that he doesn't calm down easily when he's angry, I reluctantly decided to go to the convenience store. Once I arrived, I bumped into Sarah, a neighbor. "Oh, Sarah, good evening." "Good evening, Lisa. Did you forget to buy something too?" "I ran out of sauce, so I came here." Sarah's cheerful voice slightly lifted my spirits. "My husband really wanted beer, and he told me to buy it. Why didn't he just go himself?" That's what I said, but it didn't get through to him. "It sounds like you're having a tough time, Lisa." After walking together for a bit, Sarah and I parted ways at a crossroad. When I returned home, David was lounging on the sofa, watching TV, having not even cleaned up after dinner. "Why did it take you so long? What were you dawdling around for? Give me the beer." David's disgruntled voice and his insensitive remarks made my heart ache. However, I handed him the beer without a word and began cleaning up after the meal. How could he say such things to me, especially when I'm pregnant? I felt the urge to retort, but I didn't want another shouting match, so I remained silent. Afterward, I had my dinner, took a relaxing bath, and headed to the bedroom. The next morning, David acted as if nothing had happened. It seems he's the type to forget everything after a good night's sleep. However, I couldn't forget his words from the previous night, and I consciously ignored him. "Why are you making that face so early in the morning? Don't take it out on me. I'm heading to work now, so be a bit considerate. You know the importance of appreciation, right?" Due to what he said, I was filled with the urge to retort, "That applies to you, doesn't it?" But out of shock and disbelief, all I could do was sigh deeply and see him off. "Be careful, right? I won't eat dinner tonight. See you." Without any explanation, David left in a hurry. After seeing him off, I took care of household chores and went shopping as usual. However, since David mentioned he wouldn't be having dinner, I decided to prepare something simple just for myself. Then, as I was about to start my meal alone in the evening, I heard David's unexpected return and rushed to the entrance. "I'm back. Thanks for your hard work, but you said you didn't need dinner today, right?" "Yeah, but my drinking party got canceled. I'm hungry. You have something to eat, right?" "Well, I only prepared a meal for myself today." Upon hearing this, David's face contorted with anger. "Didn't you even consider the possibility I might come back? This is unbelievable." Saying that, he moved to the dining table, and upon seeing the dinner I prepared, his mood worsened. "What do you call this a meal? I seriously question if you're properly doing your duties as a housewife. Don't waste the money I'm working for. I quickly prepared something for myself. Please don't get mad like this. Maybe you should learn proper cooking from my mom. Honestly, I've always found your cooking lacking." Again, he always compares me to his mother. Doesn't he realize how hurtful these comparisons can be? "I can't eat this. Go buy something." Hearing this, my heart sank further. What does he think of me? It's already night, and I've taken a bath. Can't you go buy it yourself? Forget it. You forgot to buy beer yesterday, didn't prepare dinner today. It's so frustrating. "I'm going back to my parents' place." David stormed out and left alone in the house. I strangely felt a sense of relief. The next morning, as I expected, I received an angry call from David's mother. "How can you not serve David a proper meal? This feels like moral harassment, if not worse." I explained what happened yesterday, but she wasn't accepting it. So I apologized and ended the call. After the call, my mood plummeted. Since David wasn't home, I decided to have a leisurely late brunch. However, the thought of David coming back tonight weighed on my mind. Considering yesterday's events, I decided to make tonight's dinner special. I shopped with more care than usual, picking out ingredients and adding David's favorite beer to the cart. I was determined to prepare a dinner that would earn David's praise. I shortened my blog update time a bit to allocate more time to cooking. After dedicating ample time to preparations, the table was set beautifully, as if it was a special occasion. Looking at it, I felt a sense of accomplishment and couldn't help but praise myself. With this, he should definitely be satisfied. I waited patiently in the dining room for David to come home, but as time passed, there was no sign of him. I tried contacting him several times via my smartphone, but there was no response, and I became more worried as the clock continued to tick. 1 hour, then 2 hours passed, and I began to get anxious. Did he possibly go to his parents' house? Thinking this, I called David's parents to check, but they said he hadn't come there either. I tried calling David multiple times, but still, there was no response. As midnight approached, just when I was considering contacting the police, a staggering David returned home. He seemed clearly drunk. "I'm home, hiccup." I rushed to the entrance in concern and found David lying on the hallway floor. "What happened? Are you okay?" Hearing my voice, he responded angrily, "Too loud, go away." He then staggered towards the dining room. When I tried to support him, he forcefully shook off my hand. "Don't touch me. Don't come near me with that ugly face. To think you're my wife." In his drunken state, he spat out those words and then just lay down right there. Those words were beyond shocking. Why? Why can't he consider others' feelings? His remarks hurt me deeply, and I was filled with thoughts of maybe he no longer sees me as family. Tears welled up in my eyes. I put so much effort into cooking, it was all for nothing. With that thought, I had my dinner alone and enveloped in loneliness. The next morning, David woke up as if nothing had happened. "My head hurts. I guess I drank too much." "But why did you leave me in the hallway? You chose to lie down there, David. It's not my fault. Aren't you my wife? At least take care of me when I'm drunk." David's words made me wonder why he always blames me right away. If you weren't going to eat at home, you could have at least let me know. I had prepared a nice meal, and I called you multiple times. Why didn't you answer? Then David replied nonchalantly, "My drinking party from the day before got rescheduled to yesterday. Do I have to report everything? Besides, you know how hard it is to pick up the phone during a gathering. Think about my situation." With every word David said, my heart got colder and my expectations of him diminished. That way, I won't feel hurt or disappointed anymore. This thought lingered in my mind that I'm taking a break and going back to my parents' home tomorrow. Being with you lately feels unpleasant and boring. Seeing David's attitude of looking down on me made me increasingly consider the option of divorce. Our baby is due soon, and my heart races in anticipation. Even though I've heard stories about the pains of labor from friends, my excitement to meet the new life inside me overshadows those concerns. The neighbors often encourage me with words like, "It's just a little while longer," which brightens my mood. "Hey, want to go on a family trip soon after David returned home?" He made a surprising suggestion. "Really? But I'm talking about a family trip. My mom and dad want to join." I was taken aback. Why would parents make such a proposal? Tensions exist between me and David's parents whenever there's an issue concerning David. They tend to blame me, like the previous phone call incident. However, the sudden idea of a trip left me doubtful. I'm about to give birth soon, and traveling a long distance might be a bit risky. David replied, "How many times do I have to tell you? Just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you're sick. My parents are thoughtfully inviting us. But what if something happens? It'll be fine. Everything's already decided. We'll go for 2 nights and 3 days next week." "What? Next week is my due date. That's a bit. Just do as you're told. Prepare for the trip." End of discussion. David just expressed his opinion and then left the room. I'm in trouble now, I thought to myself. The next day, I sought advice from a close friend and explained the situation. She was concerned and said, "That's a bit too much." While I was contemplating how to decline the offer, the day of the trip suddenly arrived. "Actually, I'm not feeling well today. I'm worried about the baby, so I'm going to rest at home." I tried to use that as an excuse, but David didn't seem convinced. "Anyway, you can just rest in the car, and you'll be fine, right? Come on, bring the luggage. We're heading to my parents' house, so hurry up." As we headed to the car, I was worried and asked, "Is this really okay?" After loading our luggage into the car and sitting in the passenger seat, I felt warmth at my feet. Looking down, I noticed water spreading around them. "Oh my water broke." I immediately informed David. "David, I think my water just broke. Please take me to the hospital quickly." Taken aback by the situation, David exclaimed, "Are you serious?" "Yes, I'm serious. We need to go to the hospital now. The baby might be coming." While trying to clean up the water with a towel in the car, David suddenly opened the passenger door. "David, what are you doing? We need to go to the hospital. Get out, you're going to make a mess in the car." I was in complete shock. "What are you saying?" I said, "Get out. I need to clean the car." Then David forcefully pulled me out of the car. In this unbelievable situation, David said, "I can't believe this. We were supposed to be on a family trip. Just go to the hospital by yourself." I was too shocked to say anything as I called out to David, "Wait, how can you leave me here like this?" He drove away, leaving me behind. Feeling overwhelmed, I quickly dialed for an ambulance. When someone approached, asking, "Lisa, are you okay?" It was Sarah, looking concerned. Sarah immediately recognized my predicament and arranged for a special taxi, comforting me throughout. Grateful for her kindness, tears streamed down my face. Soon after, I safely arrived at the hospital, thanks to Sarah's help. On the way, she held my hand and cheered me up, staying by my side until I was taken to my room. While being transferred, I made a silent vow. I will make him pay for this. Even as labor pains grew, Sarah kept holding my hand. Furthermore, she contacted my parents, who soon arrived at the hospital and looked deeply concerned. Sarah whispered to them, "There's something I want to discuss." The 3 then left the room. As the labor pains intensified, my smartphone vibrated from a corner of the room. "Who is it?" I asked, and my parents responded with David's name. They looked displeased, but I took the call anyway. As soon as I answered, I heard a panicky David, "Help me." However, I was in no state or mood to converse with him, and promptly ended the call. Despite my parents turning off my phone, David continued to send messages. As labor intensified, I was finally moved to the delivery room. After enduring the pain for some time, I finally heard my baby's cries. Exhausted, I saw my parents and Sarah standing before me with warm smiles. Relieved, I closed my eyes and rested. When I woke up after a few hours of sleep, I found myself lying in the hospital bed. Rubbing my eyes, I noticed my parents sitting next to me, their faces filled with concern. "Are you okay?" My mother asked gently, still feeling the weight of exhaustion. I couldn't muster the energy to sit up, while my father looked teary-eyed. My mother consoled him, saying, "The postpartum period can be exhausting." Witnessing this heartwarming scene, a smile formed on my face. "How's the baby?" I inquired. My parents informed me that the baby was undergoing some tests but would be back in the room soon. However, I noticed Sarah wasn't present. Responding to my unspoken question, my mother remarked, "Sarah left a little while ago." Thinking about how things might have turned out had Sarah not been there, a feeling of gratitude settled over me. I made a promise with my parents that after being discharged, I would visit Sarah to express my gratitude. Turning on my smartphone to inform my friends about the birth, I was met with an overwhelming number of missed calls, mostly from David. The sheer number left me momentarily stunned, but I felt no hope or expectation from his calls. So I closed the notifications without hesitation. One of my friends visited the hospital room to congratulate me on the birth. As she rejoiced and extended her genuine wishes, I opened up about the recent incidents with David. After hearing the story, she expressed both shock and anger, half-jokingly saying she'd like to punish him a bit. But she also emphasized that my health and rest were paramount, chatted with me for a while, and then left. My parents, already briefed by Sarah about the whole episode, asked, "What are you planning to do next?" I shared my thoughts about my relationship with David and told my parents I'm considering divorce. They respected my decision and provided their support. Upon my discharge, I planned to stay at my parents' house, where they had prepared a room for me. Meanwhile, David seemed to have visited the hospital, but as I had informed the hospital staff that I didn't wish to see him, he wasn't allowed in. The next day, Sarah came to my hospital room holding a fruit basket. "Sarah, you came!" I exclaimed with delight. "You seem to be recovering well, but remember not to overexert yourself. Postpartum fatigue can be quite profound," she advised. Feeling comforted by Sarah's words, I sighed with relief, taking the fruit basket from her. "Sarah, thank you so much for helping me. I don't know what would have happened if you weren't there." I expressed my deep gratitude as I bowed deeply. Sarah gently laughed, saying, "What's most important is that both you and the baby are healthy. I just want a small hand. Regardless, I'm forever grateful. Once things settle down, I'll come over to thank you properly." Sarah laughed warmly in response. "You know, I've talked to my husband about what happened. He seemed quite furious." From her words, I could somewhat deduce David's situation. "Sarah, I'm truly sorry for dragging you into this mess," I admitted. "Don't worry. Remember who you owe for being able to work at your current company. This incident is truly hard to forgive." At that moment, I heard a stern tone in Sarah's voice for the first time. Sarah was actually the wife of the CEO at the company where my husband worked. When we first moved to this residential area, I had no idea about this fact. However, as we frequently encountered each other at the local supermarket, shops, and occasionally at convenience stores, we gradually became closer. We even began to enjoy tea together, and during these sessions, I learned about the nature of her husband's job. On the other hand, my husband was completely unaware of this background. This was because he didn't even accompany me for our initial neighborhood greetings and didn't prefer interacting with our neighbors. Sarah had previously told me gently, "I don't want to cause any trouble, so don't tell your husband," and I had respected that request. Knowing that I was pregnant and still being forced to endure my husband's unreasonable behavior, Sarah had several times suggested, "Should I talk to my husband about this?" However, I I had always declined, not wanting to trouble her. But with this recent incident, perhaps even Sarah reached her limit. That's why my husband kept calling Sarah. I really can't thank you enough for everything. Sarah's strong words made me realize how fortunate I was to have someone who'd go to such lengths for me. I couldn't help but tear up. Seeing my reaction, Sarah once again gave me a warm smile. Lisa, you're a dear friend to me. I can't just stand by and watch when something like this happens to a friend. Our conversation was filled with heartfelt smiles. However, my husband's messages didn't stop despite the barrage of notifications. Online, I consciously ignored them all. Thinking about the divorce made my mind clear, and all I wanted was to think about how to live my life with my baby. As I was preparing to leave the hospital, a close friend visited my room, handing me her smartphone and saying, "I want you to see this." Displayed on her phone was a post that had become a major topic on a certain social media platform. When I asked what it was about, she informed me that she had posted about my husband's recent actions on social media. My friend had a significant influence on social media with a massive follower count. One day, she received a reply to one of her posts. The follower who replied had, by chance, captured a video of the scene where I was yelled at by my husband after being let out of the car. The follower, wanting to protect my privacy, blurred my face in the video, and, with my friend's permission, shared it online. The video spread like wildfire, and as a result, personal details about my husband and even his company were identified. Currently, my husband seems to be under a barrage of criticism online. What? I had no idea it had escalated to this level. My friend, smiling gently, remarked. Well, they brought it upon themselves, didn't they? My husband's actions and their consequences were all a result of choices he made. Furthermore, when one of my husband's friends confronted him about the incident, he reportedly excused himself, saying, "I had a prior travel commitment with my parents that day, so I had no choice." Because of this statement, not only my husband, but also his parents began to face criticism online. The story spread even in the vicinity of my in-laws' home, and there seemed to be various topics related to my husband's parents circulating on social media. Suddenly, my phone started ringing. When I checked the screen, it was a call from my mother-in-law. That's for my mother-in-law. My friend, eyeing the screen of my phone with interest, suggested, "Why don't you pick up and give her a piece of your mind?" However, I was so fed up that I felt no words to do so and decided to ignore it. Before I knew it, the missed calls log was filled with names of my husband, father-in-law, and mother-in-law. Ever since the incident was highlighted on social media, even the hospital staff seemed to be aware of my situation and started offering genuine support. Whether my husband or in-laws came to the hospital or called multiple times, the hospital staff didn't allow any contact with me. As my discharge date approached, I had one pressing worry: whether my husband and in-laws might be lurking outside the hospital. My parents reassured me, saying, "You have nothing to worry about." But the thought of my precious baby being in danger left me anxious. However, that concern was quickly dispelled on the day of my discharge, as my parents were helping me with my belongings. I heard my husband's voice shouting, "Lisa," followed by the loud voices of my in-laws. Suddenly, men in black suits surrounded me, forming a protective barrier. As I tried to understand what was happening, one of the men approached me, gently opening the car door and said, "Don't worry, we're here on Sir's request to protect you." It seemed my parents were already aware of this, as my mom said, smiling, "Didn't I tell you there's nothing to worry about?" Believing her words, I felt relieved and smoothly got into the car. All the while, my husband and in-laws, overwhelmed by the presence of the bodyguards, couldn't come any closer. I can't find the words to express how grateful I am for Sarah supporting me like this. The only thing occupying my mind was how to reciprocate Sarah's kindness. My parents felt the same, saying in unison, "We have to find a way to show our gratitude to Sarah." Although my new life began smoothly and pleasant days continued, the contacts from my husband and in-laws never ceased. I mailed them the divorce papers, but there wasn't even a hint of acceptance. One day, my in-laws called our home. It seems my father answered, and they addressed him with the attitude of, "She became a part of our family, so no matter how she's treated, she shouldn't complain." When my father angrily retorted to their statement, it seems they were taken aback and quickly hung up. While discussing how to handle this with my parents, I decided that seeking professional assistance was the best course of action and resolved to consult a lawyer. Coincidentally, my father was acquainted with a lawyer, and when we explained our situation, he graciously promised to help. I informed the lawyer about the video circulating on social media and detailed past events. When the lawyer reached out on our behalf, my husband was initially taken aback. However, over time, he became defiant. "We'll solve marital issues ourselves. We don't need a lawyer," he argued in a fled tone. However, the lawyer calmly responded, "I'm acting upon Lisa's request. Any future communication should be directed to me. It's up to Lisa, my client, to decide whether or not she wants to involve a lawyer." My husband was at a loss for words, though initially refusing to divorce. When mediation and the possibility of a court case were suggested, the word court seemed to shake him, and he reluctantly agreed to the divorce. I have no interest in the child and have no intention of seeing them in the future, so I don't see why I should pay child support. As for property distribution, I did nothing wrong, he claimed irrationally. The lawyer calmly explained from a legal perspective, but my husband still seemed unconvinced. "In that case, it seems we'll meet in court," the lawyer suggested. My in-laws, who were listening nearby, appeared to panic and immediately agreed. When I was informed of this by the lawyer, I was shocked that I had ever married such a man. I had been communicating with Sarah since returning to my parents' home, and when I told her about the recent events, she playfully and gleefully suggested, "How about seizing your ex-husband's retirement pay? Garnishment is one way, right?" Feeling overwhelmed by Sarah's astuteness, a while later, I was contacted by the lawyer who conveyed that my husband wished to apologize in person. Wanting a satisfactory conclusion, I agreed to converse over the phone under the supervision of the lawyer. The day of the scheduled call arrived. On that day, I was accompanied by my parents and the lawyer. From the other end of the line, I heard, "Finally, you answer. Apologize now, and I'll forgive you. So come back home. Let's be a couple again. The house is a mess. I might lose my job, and everyone's looking at me coldly. All of this is your fault, so take responsibility." He continued to bombard me with accusations. Without being overwhelmed, I calmly chose how to react. When he said, "See, you can't even reply properly, truly a woman with no redeeming qualities," I finally responded, "Just so you know, this conversation is being recorded. I'll keep it as evidence. Goodbye." Hearing this, my husband's voice revealed his shock. "Wait, you recorded it? That's not fair, right?" I was joking. "I'm sorry. I can't live without you. Let's start over. We truly loved each other, right? I promise I'll try harder from now on." After hearing those words, I immediately hung up the phone. With the recorded data in hand, I handed it to the lawyer and asked, "Can you utilize this audio as evidence?" Shaking his head in disbelief, the lawyer remarked, "He truly is an incorrigible man." My parents, feeling the same as me, had firmly decided to sever ties with him. Seeing his behavior filled them more with astonishment and disappointment than anger. At some point, I realized I was slightly enjoying this drama, clinging to the little devilish side of me that emerged. The divorce procedures with my husband concluded smoothly. Both the property distribution and child support agreements went forward without a hitch, and the turmoil began to subside. Due to the information Sarah shared with her husband, the president of my ex-husband's company, he was promptly disciplined. The president, known for his family-oriented values, believed that an employee who couldn't protect his family couldn't be trusted by the company. David lost his job, couldn't make housing loan payments, and returned to his parents' home. His reputation was tarnished by the viral video, and he struggled to find stable employment, barely making ends meet with short-term part-time jobs. Rumors spread about his parents too, and according to reports from Sir's friends in the neighborhood, they seemed to live in perpetual unease. The cold societal judgment they faced, which exceeded my expectations, made me think that, surprisingly, this ostracization might be harder for them than any legal repercussions. With most matters settled and my health recovering, my parents, my baby, and I visited Sarah's home to express our gratitude. Both Sarah and her husband seemed genuinely happy and doted on my baby, making us feel warm and welcomed. After that, Sarah and my mother became close friends. Similarly, Sarah's husband and my father got along very well, and our families grew close. Furthermore, Sarah and her husband's son was around my age, and to everyone's surprise, our relationship began to develop in an unexpected direction. A few years later, the idea that I might actually become a part of Sir family was something no one could have ever predicted. Life truly is full of surprises.
Hello, I'm Isabella, and I'm about to celebrate my 29th birthday. This year marks 4 years since I married my husband, Larry, who's 2 years older than me. Our son, Roger, just turned 3. I used to work full-time, but after Roger arrived, I switched to a part-time role at the same company so I could better balance work and family life. From the beginning of our relationship, Larry was always straightforward and competent, but since we got married, I've noticed a more dominant side to him. Larry has a younger sister, Rachel, who's 10 years his junior, 22 years old. Their age gap seems to have fostered an overly indulgent attitude toward her, and while it didn't bother me much before we married, things have started to change since then. Rachel's visits, once charming, have become frequent and unannounced. She often arrives empty-handed, expecting hospitality without any regard for us, and, when she does visit, Larry expects me to serve her without question. She speaks to me as if I'm invisible, addressing Larry with a casual, "Hey, brother, I'm here again." Despite not planning for extra guests, I find myself serving dinner to Rachel and Larry. Larry, instead of showing any understanding, criticizes me in front of her, insisting that I should have been more thoughtful. Though Rachel apologizes in words, it's clear she relishes the preferential treatment from Larry. After dinner, they leave the table a mess and move to the living room, leaving Roger and me largely ignored, treated more like staff than family. One evening, just as Roger and I were about to take a bath, Larry interrupted loudly, demanding I go out and buy a gatto for Rachel, because she wanted it right now, despite it being late. Reluctantly, I agreed, taking Roger along with me to the shop. While we were out, I overheard Larry and Rachel criticizing me, questioning Larry's decision to marry me. Roger, though too young to understand fully, sensed the tension. To lighten the mood, I asked him about the gatto, and his excited choice, a fruit-covered one, helped distract us from the discomfort. We managed to find both the gatto Rachel wanted and the one Roger picked just before the shop closed. When we returned and served them, Rachel pointed at Roger's special gatto and claimed it for herself. Before I could respond, Larry took it from Roger and handed it to Rachel. Dismissing Roger's protests, Larry justified his action by saying he'd paid for the gatto, so he had the right to decide who gets which one. At that moment, I couldn't hold back any longer. I voiced my frustration loud and clear. Larry responded by threatening divorce. Roger, who had been crying, tried to ease the tension by saying, "Mom, I love gatto with strawberries too. It's delicious." As he ate a piece of the gatto meant for Rachel, seeing Roger suffer was too much for me. I quickly moved him to another room where he could enjoy his gatto in peace. In the other room, I could hear Larry apologizing to Rachel, regretting his behavior, but I stayed silent, choosing to focus on Roger's well-being. Watching him happily eat his gatto was a small comfort. Afterward, we decided to take a late bath and sleep in Roger's bed. The next morning, as I prepared breakfast, I was shocked to hear Roger crying. His cherished piggy bank, a gift from my father, had been broken, and all the money he had saved was gone. Roger, who always said goodnight to his piggy bank, was devastated. When I confronted Larry, he casually mentioned that Rachel had taken the money because she needed some cash. Holding my crying, trembling son, I felt his pain deeply. I cried with him. It was heartbreaking to see Larry put his sister's needs above our son's. Driven by anger and sadness, I confronted Larry more directly than ever before, Breaking my usual practice of avoiding arguments in front of Roger, I demanded an explanation. Without a word, Larry went to the bedroom and returned with something that took my breath away: divorce papers. I was completely shocked when I found the hidden divorce papers Larry had prepared in secret, his anger clear in every gesture. Without a word, he thrust the papers at me and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Standing there, holding Roger in my arms, the weight of our family's struggles finally hit me. Roger, who had always remained quiet about the tension between Larry and Rachel, reached his breaking point. Since the night before, he'd been crying, and the sight of his distress was too much for me to bear. I suggested we skip daycare for the day, and his loud, enthusiastic yes, accompanied by a faint smile, told me everything I needed to know. We both needed a break, so we dedicated the day to playing and bonding. Roger, beaming with joy, grabbed a picture book from the shelf, climbed into my lap, and announced, "Mama is the teacher at the nursery, right?" His innocent remark and angelic expression melted my heart, and in that moment, I decided to make the day even more special by taking the day off work. Though it might cause some inconvenience, my colleagues understood and gave me the time off. We spent the morning at the park, playing hide-and-seek and enjoying the sandbox and slide. By the time we returned home for lunch, Roger was visibly tired. Normally, he'd nap alone, but today he fell asleep in my lap, just like when he was a baby. For a moment, I thought about catching up on household chores, but I quickly decided against it. Today was about cherishing these peaceful moments with Roger. I let myself be healed by the sight of his serene, sleeping face and the sound of his gentle breathing. Just as I was soaking in the tranquility, the sound of the front door opening interrupted the calm. It was an unusual time for Larry to come home, and my heart raced with alarm. I quickly scooped Roger into my arms and hid us both in the bedroom closet. Through the thin walls, I heard a voice, Rachel's. My pulse quickened as I listened to her rummage through the house, muttering in frustration about not finding what she was looking for. Then, I heard her make a phone call, mentioning Larry and discussing their failed search. After locking the door behind her, Rachel left. I slowly came out of the closet, carefully put Roger to bed, and sat down, my mind spinning. The idea that Larry and Rachel might be conspiring left me feeling betrayed and afraid. In a whirlwind of emotions, I packed some essentials for Roger and me, and we left for the train station. Thankfully, my parents lived just 3 stops away. I didn't inform them of our arrival, but when they saw the worry in my eyes, they knew something was wrong. Without asking questions, they welcomed us in, providing the safety and understanding I desperately needed. Once settled in the comfort of their home, I shared everything with them: the shocking events, my fear of returning home, and the unsettling behavior of Larry and Rachel. My mother, ever the perceptive one, speculated that Rachel had been searching for my personal belongings, perhaps cash or cards. The thought of it sent another wave of dread through me, but at least here, with my parents, I felt a sense of temporary safety amidst the storm. As I reflected on my early career, I remembered the successes I had before marriage. I had once been the CEO of a thriving handmade goods company, a role I eventually passed on to trusted friends so I could focus on raising my child. Despite stepping back from the company, I continued working part-time from home. What Larry didn't know was that I had retained my position as CEO and maintained a level of financial independence that he was completely unaware of. The discovery of the hidden divorce papers Larry had secretly stashed away made me suspect that he believed I had substantial savings. While I had mentioned that the company still provided me with some financial support, I had purposely withheld the details of my CEO role and the full extent of my savings. This secrecy stemmed from my early realization that Larry struggled with managing money and tended to spend everything he earned. In the beginning, Larry contributed very little to our monthly food expenses and even suggested I quit working to become a full-time housewife. Given the financial strain of raising Roger on a tight food budget, I never agreed to stop working. Eventually, Larry grudgingly accepted that I would continue working part-time. Since Roger's birth, I had been using my savings to cover his nursery fees and clothing because Larry's contributions to the food budget were insufficient. I never asked him for more money, reinforcing his mistaken belief that I had ample savings. Considering Rachel's apparent need for money and Larry's misconceptions about my financial situation, it seemed likely that they were searching for my cash cards to safeguard against any potential financial intrusion. I had a separate savings account for Roger, into which a portion of my salary was directly deposited each month. Despite their efforts, they wouldn't find any cash cards, as I always kept my valuables with me. However, the ongoing issue of Rachel's unauthorized entries into our home potentially with Larry's help, remained deeply troubling. Taking my father's advice to heart, I decided to secure my valuables, including my cash cards, in my parents' safe. As I pondered their motivations, Roger approached my father, tears in his eyes, distraught over his broken piggy bank. The incident highlighted not only their financial invasion but also the emotional toll it was taking on my son. My father was incensed by the news of Roger's broken piggy bank and his lost savings, vowing to confront Larry. My mother, however, suggested a more cautious approach, finding out their motives first, as rash accusations could make us look guilty in the eyes of the law, potentially tipping the scales in Larry's favor during a divorce. To better understand their intentions, I decided to secretly record their conversations. I consulted a lawyer who was a friend of my father's before heading back to our home that evening. As I began preparing dinner, I strategically placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter to discreetly record. Larry came home earlier than expected and immediately started questioning me about my cash cards. His questions were probing, and when I remained silent, his demeanor grew increasingly agitated. He demanded that I hand over the money. I earned money from my part-time job to support his sister, but when I refused to give him more, Larry erupted in anger. He shoved the signed divorce papers towards me, accusing me of living off his money and claiming there was no need for me to save for Roger. His harsh words even suggested that he valued Rachel more than our son. At that moment, I stopped cooking, grabbed the divorce papers, took Roger by the hand, and headed for the door. Larry's voice boomed behind us as he declared his intent for a divorce, ordering me never to come back. I replied firmly, stating I would never return to a home where strangers could come and go freely. Once outside, I received numerous messages and calls from Larry, all of which I ignored. I turned off my phone and sought refuge at my parents' house. There, I shared the recording and the divorce papers with them. While I confessed that I no longer had any love or affection for Larry, my primary concern was for Roger. My parents, fully supportive of whatever decision I felt was best, acknowledged the potential emotional impact a divorce could have on him. As we discussed these heavy matters, Roger, unaware of the full extent of the situation, mentioned he was hungry. Seeing my distress, my mother kindly stepped in to make burgers, his favorite meal. Overwhelmed by emotions and grateful for the supportive environment my parents provided, I couldn't hold back my tears as my mother served Roger his meal with a warm, reassuring smile. As my mother prepared the burgers, Roger and I were reminded that we could always find comfort and joy with family. Taking a big bite, Roger's face lit up with delight, and he praised his grandma's cooking, saying he wished he could have her burgers every day. Smiling, I told him the secret ingredient was the love we all shared for him. In a heartwarming gesture, Roger took another large bite and then offered it to me. His simple act of sharing moved me to tears, despite my efforts to hold them back. Noticing my tears, my father reassured Roger that they were tears of happiness, not sadness. Understanding this, Roger hugged me tightly, and I saw my father's eyes brimming with emotion, reflecting the deep value of family. In this comforting atmosphere, I explained to Roger how precious family truly is. Surprised, he asked if Dad thought only Rachel was family. My father gently confirmed that this wasn't the case and asked Roger if he would like to live with us. With a joyful laugh, Roger happily agreed, bringing smiles to everyone's faces. Amidst these tender family moments, I realized that it was time to part ways with Larry, though the decision was tough, and the thought of discussing the divorce weighed heavily on my heart. Roger seemed to intuitively understand the need for change. He even playfully called our older pet dog his younger brother. The next day, we began formalizing the divorce proceedings with the help of a lawyer who was a friend of my father. As we set the legal wheels in motion, my father and Roger shared comforting laughs, lightening the mood. I spent time reflecting on my childhood and the strength I had gained from my family. The following day, I checked my phone and found it overwhelmed with over 180 calls and messages from Larry, revealing his emotional turmoil. Exhausted by the barrage and needing clarity, I turned off my phone. With the lawyer's assistance, we explained the entire situation to my parents, uncovering that Rachel had accumulated significant debt due to a gambling and shopping addiction, further complicating the already strained family dynamics. Larry had secretly assumed the role of guarantor for Rachel, planning to use my savings to cover her debts. The lawyer informed us that the divorce papers had already been submitted. Larry, overwhelmed by the reality of the situation, broke down when he realized the divorce was final. Despite anticipating disagreements over child support, he agreed to pay $145 per month for Roger's upkeep. In a later conversation, Larry's tone was markedly calmer. He admitted to his financial manipulations and shared his complicated feelings about his responsibilities toward Rachel. I remained firm in my decision to move forward without reconsideration. As I heard his faint sobbing, he wished me happiness before ending the call. Resolute, I discussed future plans with my parents and decided it would be best for Roger and me to stay with them until he was older. I resumed my full-time role as president of the company, reaffirming my commitment to a stable and secure future for myself and my son. Later, I learned that Larry and Rachel had explained the situation of the divorce and Rachel's debts to their parents, leading to their disownment. Today, I find immense joy and peace in being surrounded by my loving family, far removed from the turmoil of my past with Larry.
Hello, my name is Natalie, and I'm a 38-year-old woman. These past few months have been an incredibly challenging period as I found myself having to relearn and reassess many aspects of my life. Much of the difficulty stems from my relationship with my husband, Willie, but thankfully, a compassionate individual stepped in and helped me through some of the darkest moments. Let me introduce you to the people involved in my journey. First, there's my sister, Lori. She's 5 years younger than me and stunningly beautiful. Growing up, we often clashed. Lori was the popular one, the star of her social circles, while I was the classic nerd. She would tease me often, and it always felt as if there was a hint of jealousy dragging her actions. Our mother tried to bridge the gap between us, but her efforts yielded little progress. By the time I went off to college, Lori and I barely spoke. Yet, as we entered adulthood, we slowly reconnected. Although our relationship never grew particularly close, I came to accept the connection we had. Then there's Willie, my ex-husband. We met at work, hit it off quickly, and after 4 years of dating, decided to get married. Together, we bought our first home. Since I was the higher earner, the mortgage and house deed were under my name. A couple of years into our marriage, Willie brought up the idea of starting a family. He approached it gently, hoping I'd be open to it. "Honey, I've been thinking," he began. "We've been together for a while now, and maybe it's time to consider having a family of our own." I sighed, knowing this conversation would come eventually. "Willie, you know my reservations," I replied. He nodded. "I understand, but think about it. We're stable, and it could be wonderful to have little versions of us running around." "Yes, but raising children is a massive commitment and responsibility," I said, feeling the weight of the decision. Willie smiled. "And who's more hardworking and responsible than us?" Eventually, despite my hesitation, I gave in to Willie's request and we welcomed our son, followed by a daughter 4 years later. At first, Willie was a supportive partner, but before long, the balance in our relationship shifted dramatically. The responsibilities of home and childcare began to fall solely on my shoulders. After our son was born, Willie's career took off with a promotion, and he soon out-earned me. He suggested I leave my job to focus on our family. Reluctantly, I agreed, settling into the role of a full-time parent. To keep myself connected to the outside world, I started hosting dinner parties that often included my mother, Lori, and my mother-in-law, Amanda, especially when she was visiting. This new chapter brought some comforts. I cherished the extra time with my children and the regular visits from family. Even though my relationship with Willie seemed stable, a difficult birthing experience with our second child left me deeply scared, affecting our dynamic. Just when I thought I had finally adjusted, I made a disturbing discovery that shattered my sense of stability. One day, while tidying up our bedroom, I found a pair of women's underwear that didn't belong to me. My heart sank with a mix of shock and sadness. Was I no longer enough for Willie? The timing was especially painful. I was still recovering from our daughter's birth, barely a year past, and was seeing a therapist to work through my postpartum challenges. As I was beginning to make slow progress, the suspicion of infidelity felt like a devastating setback. Overcome with anger and betrayal, I needed answers. I snapped a photo of the underwear and sent it to Willie, asking for an explanation. Then, in a haze of desperation, I turned to his laptop, logging into his social media accounts and sifting through his messages. At first, there was nothing suspicious, no unfamiliar names or strange conversations, which only deepened my confusion and unease. As I dug deeper into his digital life, I braced myself for what I might uncover. I scoured through Willie's messages, digging into every conversation, hoping against hope that I wouldn't find anything incriminating. His chats were mostly with familiar contacts, and although my sister Lori's name kept popping up, it didn't alarm me at first. Why should it? I'd never thought twice about my husband and sister exchanging messages. But a nagging feeling told me to look closer, and what I discovered left me reeling. Their messages were filled with intimate photos, affectionate videos, and declarations of love. They even discussed plans for Willie to leave me. My stomach twisted as I read on, trying to process the betrayal from my own sister. We'd had our ups and downs over the years, but I never imagined she would hurt me like this. Feeling sick and betrayed, I tried calling Willie, but he didn't answer. So I called Lori instead. "Hey, what's up?" she answered casually. "No, what's up me, Lori?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "How could you?" She sounded confused. "I don't know what you mean." "Well, I found a pair of your underwear in my bedroom. Have you been sleeping with Willie?" My voice cracked as I spoke the words. Her response was chillingly nonchalant. "Yeah, for a while now." "Why?" I asked, barely able to breathe. "You're my sister. Didn't that make you think twice?" She had an absurd excuse ready. "Look, I thought I was helping you out. I was keeping Willie busy so you could focus on the kids." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're tearing our family apart." "I just want what's best for Willie. If I'm the best for him, then so be it," she said, her words hitting me like a slap in the face. "You're disgusting," I spat before hanging up, unable to fathom her audacity. Alone and devastated, I lay in bed, tears streaming down my face as I tried to process the magnitude of the betrayal from the two people I trusted most. Later that night, my youngest daughter woke up crying. I held her, moving through our routines mechanically, my mind numb with grief. I kept my distress hidden from the children. They didn't need to carry the weight of adult problems. I picked up my older child from school, made dinner, and answered their innocent questions about their dad's absence with a fabricated story about him working late. As night wore on, my anger shifted to worry. It was nearing 10 p.m., and there was still no sign of Willie. I called him repeatedly, but he didn't pick up. Desperate, I dialed Lori, but she too was unreachable. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I eventually fell asleep, clinging to the hope that this was all just a nightmare. Morning brought a harsh reality. Willie's absence was undeniable, and a quick look around the bedroom confirmed my worst fears. Most of his belongings were gone. He'd left in the night without a word, without any attempt at closure. Stunned and heartbroken, I knew I had to push through my pain. My children needed me, and I was determined to protect them from the fallout of this betrayal. I got the kids ready, dropped my eldest off at school, and took my youngest to my mother's house. The moment I walked in, my mom sensed something was wrong. My attempt to hold it together was failing, and as the morning dragged on, the thought of raising two children alone began to crush me. Finally, my mom couldn't take the silence anymore. "Okay, I've had enough of this. What's going on?" she asked, her voice firm. Gathering my courage, I started from the beginning. "I found out Willie's been cheating on me." Her face contorted in shock. "What? How do you know?" I took a deep breath, the words heavy. "I found another woman's underwear in our bedroom." As I shared more, emotions I'd kept bottled up started pouring out, marking the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter. When I confronted Willie about it, he didn't respond. He just left, I said. "Left? What do you mean?" she asked, bewildered. "I woke up this morning and all his things were gone. He took everything in the night without a word." The disbelief was still raw. "Oh, my poor girl," my mom said, her voice filled with sorrow. "It gets worse," I hesitated, bracing myself to share the full extent of the betrayal. I snooped through his things and found out. "It's Lori." My mom gasped, shock evident on her face. "Your sister?" "Yes," I whispered, the bitterness of the words making me feel sick. I called her, and she was so casual about it. She said they were in love and thought she was better for him. My mom's face hardened, and she shook her head in disbelief. "What has Lori done? I can't believe this." She put a hand on my shoulder. "I don't know how you're going to get through this, but I'll be here to help, okay?" I nodded, feeling a glimmer of relief in her support. Telling her wasn't as hard as I'd imagined, and the weight of the truth finally shared allowed me a moment of rest. I ended up falling asleep while she took care of my youngest. When I woke, I heard my baby crying and my mom's raised voice in the next room. I rushed out to find her angrily ending a phone call. She turned to me, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry for the noise," she said, not elaborating, but I knew she'd been giving Lori a piece of her mind. Over the next few days, Mom stayed with us. She even asked me to block Lori on her behalf, choosing to shut out the one who had hurt us so deeply. Having my mother's support gave me strength to face the aftermath. One particularly lonely day, friends reached out, concerned by rumors of a quick wedding between Willie and Lori. News had already spread that they'd gotten married just a day after Willie had left. Humiliating as it was to admit what had happened, their responses were comforting. My friends chose to cut ties with both of them, standing by me in solidarity. When I told my mom, I could feel her fury. Normally the calmest person I knew, her anger underscored the gravity of Lori's betrayal. But her support was unwavering, not only emotionally but financially as well. She went above and beyond, helping me line up job interviews to regain my independence. Day-to-day life with the kids was challenging but manageable. The hardest part was hiding my sorrow when they asked about their dad. Each time, I put on a brave face, determined not to let his actions define our lives. About a week after Willie's departure, I received a letter from him. But by then, my heart had hardened. I didn't want his apologies or excuses, especially not after the silence that followed his disappearance. In a moment of anger, I burned the letter, a final gesture of closure. Sometimes, in quieter moments, I wondered what he might have said. Part of me regretted not reading it, wondering if there could have been any explanation that would make sense of the wreckage he'd left behind. But the decision was made, and I resolved to let the past go. I had to move forward, focusing on rebuilding a life for my children and myself amidst the turmoil. I often reminded myself that nothing Willie could have written in that letter would change how I felt or undo the damage he'd caused. The next day, hoping to lift our spirits, my mom and I took the kids to the fair. Surrounded by the lively atmosphere, we allowed ourselves to relax and laugh, finding a much-needed escape from the recent turmoil. Later that evening, as we unwound with a glass of wine, I mentioned the letter. "Something came in the mail last night," I began. "Oh, what was it?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "A letter from Willie." "What did it say?" she asked, assuming I'd read it. "I don't know. I didn't open it," I admitted. "You didn't open it? Why not?" "I just didn't want to deal with anything he had to say, so I burned it," I replied, trying to sound casual. Her eyes widened. "Natalie, what if it was something important? Like divorce papers?" "It didn't look official at all. I'm pretty sure it wasn't that," I reassured her. "Well, if you're certain, what do you think he wanted to say?" "Probably a weak apology or something about wanting his things back." "I wouldn't be surprised," I said, brushing off the nagging thoughts about the letter's contents. She paused, then shifted her gaze back to me. "How are you feeling about everything now?" "Today was a good day, but it's hard. Especially when the kids keep asking about their dad. I don't even know what to tell them," I admitted, feeling the weight of the situation creep back in. "It's okay if it's still hard, as long as it's getting a bit better. And I want you to know, I'm here for you, always," she said. She hesitated, then added, "I'm planning to cut ties with your sister. Everything I have will go to you and the kids." "Oh, Mom, that means so much, but are you sure?" "Lori's still your daughter," I replied, realizing the magnitude of her decision. "She may be my daughter, but what she did was unforgivable. I raised both of you better than this, and she clearly didn't care," she said, her voice resolute. "She's no longer my daughter in my eyes." It was a harsh decision, and while I understood, I knew it couldn't have been easy for her. The thought of disowning my own child was unimaginable, and it only deepened my gratitude for my mom's unwavering support. 5 days later, a knock at the door broke the quiet routine we'd settled into. I wasn't expecting anyone, and with my mom at work, visitors were rare. Opening the door cautiously, I saw 2 men in black suits on my porch. "Can I help you?" I asked, peering out. "We're lawyers and we have something for you," one of them replied, handing me an envelope and then a check. My eyes widened as I glanced at it. A check made out to me for $920,000. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "There's no mistake," they assured me. "Please read the note." Opening the envelope, I found a letter from Amanda, my mother-in-law. She'd come by 5 days earlier but found no one home. When she called Willie, he hinted that he was locked out because I had changed the locks. Sensing something was wrong, Amanda had pressed him until he admitted everything. Appalled by his behavior, she had made arrangements to write me and her grandchildren into her will. In her note, she thanked me for saving her from entrusting her estate to Willie, and she explained that she was terminally ill. She had passed away the day before, ensuring her last wish was fulfilled. Her assets went to me and the children. Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. Amanda's unexpected kindness and unwavering support, even in her final days, was both heartwarming and bittersweet. Her integrity and strength were traits I had admired, and even though Willie resented them, they had been a comfort to me. Not long after Amanda's passing, Willie reached out over the phone. I expected an attempt at reconciliation, but I chose to listen. "What's this all about?" he demanded. "You'll need to be more specific," I replied calmly. "Why weren't you at the house when I asked?" "I sent you a letter with instructions for my mom's visit," he said. "Oh, that was in the letter? I never read it." "I burned it," I admitted. "You burned it? You've ruined everything," he accused. "Mom was supposed to help with her estate, but you've taken everything for yourself." "That's hypocritical, Willie. You left us, and now you only care because of the money. Your mother made her decision to protect us. Please don't contact me or the children again," I responded, ending the call firmly. I moved swiftly to legalize our separation. The divorce was straightforward, and I was granted full custody of our children. Willie tried to challenge Amanda's will to claim a portion of the inheritance, but her documents were ironclad, leaving him unsuccessful. Willie and Lori continued to harass me, hoping I'd relent, but I stayed resolute in my decision. The inheritance allowed me to secure my children's future, fund their education, and make sound investments to ensure our stability. It also gave my mom the chance to retire comfortably. I returned to work, and although it was a challenging adjustment for the kids, we found our new rhythm. In time, when they're mature enough, I'll share the full story with my children. Though the memories still carry some pain, I'm optimistic about the future. There's a sense of promise in the road ahead, and I'm confident that brighter days are on their way.
I've come to a harsh realization: Owen lacks responsibility and compassion. It's clear now that I have to take decisive action. I've decided to stay in this house with my parents, and Owen will need to leave. Since we got married, Owen has depended on me for everything. Despite my efforts, and the $4,000 I pay in monthly rent, he's now trying to force me out of my own home. This is my breaking point. 4 months. I've contemplated divorce, but Owen's selfishness and dismissive remarks have solidified my decision. I told him firmly, "I will leave this house." "Yes, but for now, you need to go." His response? A shrug and a flippant, "Fine, I'll be out tonight and back tomorrow. Just make sure you're gone by then." The nerve of him. "Don't you even care to check what I might take with me?" I asked. He replied without hesitation, "Don't touch my equipment. Do whatever you want with the rest of the stuff." His dismissive attitude left me stunned but also resolute. If he's giving me free rein to manage the household items, I might as well use the opportunity wisely. Perhaps it's time Owen faces the consequences of his choices. I've already started planning. If necessary, I'll hire a removal service to pack up everything I care about. Owen might finally learn what it's like to deal with the aftermath of his actions. Let me give you some context. I'm Erica, 31 years old, a graduate of a prestigious program, and a researcher at a well-known company. My career is stable, and I earn enough to afford a $4,000 a month apartment. On paper, my life seems ideal: a good job, a nice home, and a family. I have a husband, Owen, and a son, Sam. From the outside, it might look like I have it all. But appearances can be deceiving. That $4,000 rent is a significant strain on our budget, even with my decent salary. The real issue, however, is Owen's refusal to contribute meaningfully. At 32, he's still chasing a dream of becoming a musician. I once admired his ambition. In his early days, he performed at events and small venues, and his passion was inspiring. But that was years ago. The income he makes from part-time jobs is erratic, and his dream of making it big feels more like an illusion. Meanwhile, I've been left to shoulder all the responsibility. When I voice my concerns about the financial burden, Owen dismisses them. "You sound like an old woman," he scoffs. "I'm not complaining, I'm stating facts. I've been patient, supportive, and understanding, but my patience has run out. I've carried this marriage and this family long enough. Owen's refusal to change has forced me to make a choice. Divorce is no longer just an idea, it's the solution. I deserve a life where I'm not constantly worrying about rent or being belittled for speaking the truth. Sam and I deserve better. It's time to prioritize my well-being and let go of a relationship that only holds me back. When I was younger, I saw Owen's potential. He seemed full of promise, and I believed in his dreams. When I got pregnant, he promised to work hard for our future. I was 20 when we got married, and I thought he would let go of his music career to focus on building a life with us. At first, I felt guilty for questioning his choices. I didn't want him to feel like he had to abandon his dreams entirely, but after Sam was born, nothing changed. Owen kept chasing his music dreams, working part-time jobs, and acting as if he had no other obligations. I couldn't take it anymore. One day, I confronted him. How long do you plan to keep working part-time? You're almost 32. People your age are building careers. I have my own way of living, he replied, dismissively. Don't compare me to others. His words infuriated me. Your way of living doesn't mean anything if you're not contributing. Start helping with household expenses. When I become famous, he shot back. I'll make up for the money I'm not earning now. Stop dreaming and face reality. I snapped. He had no answer. Eventually, he picked up another part-time job, but it wasn't enough. Despite everything, he kept talking about his dreams. You're being too noisy, he'd say. Times have changed. There are so many ways to succeed without signing with an agency. I'm making progress, even if it's slow. It's exhausting. His band broke up years ago, and the other members moved on. Some got married, others found steady jobs. Owen clings to the past. He calls giving up on dreams pathetic, but I see it differently. Sacrificing a dream to support your family is meaningful and responsible. Is that so wrong? When I was pregnant, Owen promised to work hard for our child. What he really meant was he'd keep working hard at his music career. I kept hoping he'd change, but now I see it's not going to happen. Did you buy expensive clothes again? I asked recently, frustrated. Looking good is important for my job, he replied. His job? His dream? His excuses? They're not enough anymore. It's time for me to move on. I'm ready to rebuild a life of stability and happiness for myself and my son, without Owen holding us back. I couldn't believe it. Owen hasn't made a single dollar from his music career, yet he talks as if he's already a star. It's been 11 years since our son, Sam, was born, and Owen is still working part-time jobs. At nearly 32, he's spent years chasing dreams that have yielded no tangible success. Instead of contributing to the household, he spends money on expensive clothes and music equipment. I wish you'd spend less on those things and help with the household expenses, I told him. You can't satisfy hunger with pretense. These things are necessary for me, he snapped back. His attitude fuels our arguments. We try to discuss these issues privately, away from Sam, but in a small apartment. It's impossible to keep our voices from carrying. Sam often overhears, and that's one reason we've considered moving to a bigger place. As our son grows, the apartment only feels more cramped. Sam's 11 now, and this place is too small, I told Owen. Should we move? Yeah, he said nonchalantly. This was your house originally anyway, right? You lived here alone before we got married. Do you have a problem with that? I asked. It's not a problem, he replied, but I'd like to move to a bigger place, maybe a high-rise condo. That would be cool. And who's going to pay for it? I pressed. I'll help with the household expenses, he said, as if it were a great concession. You handle the rent, and I'll cover electricity, gas, and groceries. Please, I really want to live in a high-rise condo. With my salary, it was possible to afford the rent, and his offer to help, even in a small way, gave me a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the push he needed to start valuing money and taking responsibility. Okay, I agreed. I'll look for a place, but since I'm paying the rent, I get to choose where we live. Deal? Deal, he said eagerly. As long as it's a high-rise condo, I'm fine with whatever you pick. I hoped this move would mark a fresh start for our family, but things didn't go as planned. A year after moving into the condo, Owen is still chasing his music dreams, still making excuses, and still breaking promises. Hey, the gas bill came, I reminded him one day. Make sure you pay it before it's debited from my account. I'll give it to you next time, he said casually. When is next time? You always say that, but you never pay, I said, frustration boiling over. Do you think money isn't important? I'm asking for the bare minimum to cover our bills. Why do I have to keep scolding you about this? All you ever do is fuss about money, he snapped. His dismissiveness left me fuming. Owen promised to help with the bills, but it's clear his promises were empty. Thankfully, I set up direct payments for utilities to avoid overdue charges. Otherwise, Owen would likely neglect them entirely. Occasionally, he leaves small amounts of money behind, like the $100 bill I once found on the living room table. For a moment, I thought maybe he was embarrassed to hand it to me directly. Perhaps it was his way of showing he cared, but then I realized I was wrong. He hadn't paid his share of the electricity bill that month either. I do pay sometimes, don't I? Owen argued when I confronted him. It felt like he only handed over small amounts to soothe his conscience. Then there were the lies. One day, he asked me, I want to take my parents on a trip. Can you lend me some money? How much do you need? I asked. $100 should be enough, he replied. I gave him the money, but deep down, I knew it wasn't for a trip. Owen has a habit of lying when he wants pocket money. He likely used it to treat his friends or buy something frivolous. Meanwhile, I'm left paying $4,000 a month for rent. I thought moving into this condo might inspire Owen to take work more seriously, but he continues to let me down. I can't save for the future under these conditions. I'd rather use the money for something meaningful, like Sam's education or our retirement. I've considered divorce before, but now it's becoming a serious option. Then Owen said something that made my decision crystal clear. Hey, we have an unused room, right? I was thinking of clearing it out and making it a space for my parents, he said. A room for your parents? Are you saying they'd move in with us? I asked, surprised. My parents are getting older. We can't just leave them alone, he said, trying to sound noble. I know Owen well enough to see through him. He talks big but rarely follows through. Who does he think pays the $4,000 rent? I also cover all living expenses and our son's education. The idea of taking on the responsibility of his parents as well was unacceptable. I'm against it, I replied firmly. Don't answer so quickly. Think about it for a while, he urged. I have thought about it, and my answer is no, I said again. Why are you being so stubborn? What's wrong with taking care of my parents? Are you telling me to abandon them? You're heartless, he snapped. To an outsider, I might sound selfish, but the problem isn't his parents, it's Owen. If they moved in, I know I'd be the one taking care of them, just as I handle everything else in this household. I will not live with your parents, I said resolutely. Owen glared at me. Fine, I'll live here with them. You need to leave. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Since we got married, Owen has been entirely dependent on me, and now he's trying to kick me out of the house I pay for. His selfishness and irresponsibility made my decision clear. Fine, I said coldly. I'll leave. Good. Pack your things and get out quickly. I'll be back tomorrow evening. Make sure you're gone by then. Are you sure you don't want to check what I might take with me? I asked. Don't touch my equipment. Do whatever you want with the rest, he said before storming out. With Owen gone, a strange sense of freedom washed over me. As I stood there, my 15-year-old son, Sam, stepped out of his room. Mom, I'll help you pack. I'll go with you too, he said softly, trying to comfort me. His words broke my heart. Whenever Owen and I fought, Sam would quietly retreat to avoid the tension. As a parent, it crushed me to see my child feel like he had to tiptoe around us. Where should we start, Mom? He asked. Start with your own things, I said. I have something else to handle. I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Owen was about to get a little shock of his own. As I grabbed my phone and made a call, I prepared for the next step in our escape. Hello, I'm sorry for the last-minute request, but could you help us tomorrow? I asked. Once everything essential was packed, my son and I left for a business hotel to figure out our next move. It wasn't ideal, but it felt like the first step toward reclaiming our lives. That evening, as expected, Owen called. I placed my phone on the table, exchanged a glance with Sam, and answered. What's going on? Where are you? Owen's voice was loud and agitated. What do you mean? Is there a problem? I asked calmly. All my clothes and equipment are here, but everything else is gone. Where's the table? The fridge? Did you take them? His panic was palpable. No, I replied. I called a junk removal service. By now, it's probably all been burned. Sam, sitting nearby, chimed in. Owen fell silent for a moment, likely shocked to realize Sam was still with me. What do you mean, burned? He finally sputtered. The furniture and appliances are marital property. You told me I could do whatever I wanted with everything except your equipment. So I did, I said. How am I supposed to live now? He yelled. If you need furniture, buy new ones. In the meantime, Use your amp as a chair or wrap your guitar in a towel for a pillow, I replied, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. That's not funny, how could you do something so nasty? He snapped. We're getting a divorce, I said firmly. Yes, I understand, he replied, trying to sound unaffected. I knew he thought this was just another argument, but I had made up my mind. His response only strengthened my resolve. Good, I said, we'll talk about the details later. Since you're planning to live in the house with your parents, I'll go to the real estate agent tomorrow to update the contract. Owen hesitated. If you change the contract to my name, the divorce will be final. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice trembling. Yes, I said coldly, making it clear there was no turning back. His pride wouldn't let him backtrack, even though I could tell he regretted how far things had gone. A few days later, we went to the real estate office to finalize the condo arrangements. I ended my part of the contract with ease, but Owen hit a wall when he tried to transfer it to his name. What? The rent is $4,500? His face went pale. He had no idea how expensive it was, because he'd never asked. He assumed he could rely on his parents to help cover the cost, but their retirement income made that impossible. You've been paying this much every month? He asked in disbelief. Yes, I replied, and I've been covering everything else too, because you never contributed. I can't afford this, he admitted. Of course not, I said, you wouldn't even pass the screening. The real estate agent confirmed this, and Owen sat in stunned silence. So, what do I do now? He finally asked. If you can't sign the contract, you'll have to leave, I said matter-of-factly. Owen's face reddened, a mix of anger and humiliation. Reluctantly, he left the office, realizing he was completely out of his depth. After the divorce was finalized, Owen's life fell apart. When I informed his parents about the situation, they decided to stop supporting him until he found stable work. Unable to rely on them, Owen struggled to rent even a small apartment. His freelancing income was too unstable to sustain a music career, and at 32, his chances of finding a regular job were slim. Meanwhile, I found a new apartment for Sam and me. The rent is much more affordable, and I can finally use my income for meaningful things like our future. While I don't fault anyone for chasing their dreams, I found peace in creating a stable, happy life for my son. That's what truly matters to me now.
If you wish, we can consider divorce, but I'd like to continue living with our son. Despite John berating me extensively, he looked satisfied as he took a deep breath. I pondered how to respond, and our son, who had been waiting in the background, stepped forward. Dad, if you don't know, let me tell you, our son said, pointing at his father's mistress. His words made me break into a cheeky smile. My name is Jennifer. I turned 42 this year, currently working as a freelance illustrator. We've been married for 15 years, and we have a son in 8th grade. Throughout our marriage, John has jumped from job to job, not lasting very long. Most of our income comes from my work as I balance housework, raising our child, and my job. Working from home became a necessity as John took sporadic short-term jobs. Despite being a newbie in the freelance world initially, my efforts resulted in a stable income and consistent work. Referrals from former clients led to new projects, and I now illustrate educational magazines and brochures. With David growing up, I managed to work from home and go out for work a few times a week. The three of us lived harmoniously, but John's lack of direction troubled me. At 44, he seemed content with his aimless life, rarely working full-time. Despite having free time, he didn't contribute much to housework or child raising. John's disinterest in our son David, who was entering his challenging teenage years, frustrated me. David, although not very talkative, occasionally helped with chores without being asked. However, John showed no interest in our son and rarely assisted with household responsibilities. Lately, John had been coming home late more often, and I couldn't shake off my unease and frustration. Even on days when he claimed to be working, I suspected he might be doing something else. His sudden interest in picking up and dropping off David at his basketball club raised suspicions, as it contradicted our household rule of always having a parent handle these tasks. While I appreciated the help, something felt off, and my suspicions started to crystallize over the past few months. As I passed by the place where David goes, I decided to take a different route home for a change of scenery. While shopping near David's facility, I unexpectedly spotted John, who wasn't supposed to be there. He had claimed he'd be late tonight due to out-of-town work. To my surprise, he was chatting happily with a woman who appeared to be one of the staff members from the basketball facility. A sense of unease washed over me as I observed the two of them. The woman noticed me and tilted her head, asking, "Excuse me, are you David's mom?" I reluctantly confirmed, and she thanked me for my son being in her care. Awkwardly nodding, I engaged in small talk with her, curious about her role at the facility. Ignoring my husband, who seemed rigid and tense, I attempted to gather information. The woman introduced herself as Jessica, but I couldn't help but wonder why she didn't provide more details about her role with David. Ignoring my puzzled expression, my husband seemed eager to end their conversation. On the way home, we didn't speak, and he deliberately avoided eye contact, appearing distant. His recent late returns and eagerness to handle drop-offs and pickups, combined with his strange behavior after being spotted, fueled my suspicions. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica had something to do with it. As we walked home, I wondered if he was having an affair with this younger woman. In my heart, I sensed a change since he began doing the drop-offs and pickups. He had become noticeably distant, and when I inquired about his behavior, our son responded curtly, displaying annoyance. Chasing after our reluctant son and forcing him to the facility every day felt wrong. My suspicions grew, and soon they were confirmed. One day, as I casually dropped by, Jessica found excuses to visit our home more frequently. While she mentioned our son, it became clear that it was just a pretext. She always appeared when my husband was home, not me or our son. Watching them cheerfully converse in the living room, I was certain of John's infidelity. A month after noticing odd behavior, my husband began coming home later and occasionally leaving for days. When I jokingly remarked about his late return, suggesting he spare me the cheating, he abruptly stood up and glared at me. "Just stick to your work. I'm taking care of David, so don't pry into it unnecessarily," he retorted before leaving the living room with a sigh. I seethed with anger at being told as if he was handling everything, when in reality, he had left all the housework and the responsibility of taking care of David to me. My frustration surfaced during one of our petty disputes, and David, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. "What's the matter, Mom?" David questioned, having noticed the tension. Trying to downplay it, I asked about him and why he was up at that hour. David, stepping out of his room, stared at me before hesitantly sharing his observations about a female staff member he suspected to be his father's mistress. According to David, this woman, Jessica, would frequently approach him at the facility, annoying him with her clinginess. He felt frustrated that she had started coming to our house, a sentiment I shared. It was evident that my son disliked having someone from his basketball club imposing on our home, providing me with a sense of relief. However, the problem persisted. Returning home from a client meeting, I heard cheerful conversation in the living room, the voices of John and Jessica. David was noticeably absent, holed up in his room. Upon entering the living room, both John and Jessica turned their eyes toward me. Jessica, with unwavering confidence, greeted me. "Welcome back, David's mom." I ran into John, so he invited me in, Jessica said, addressing my husband by his name, a fact that deeply unsettled me. Attempting sarcasm, I inquired about her frequent meetings with John, to which she responded with a smug face, claiming it was part of her job. Her audacity continued as she pointed out the deficiencies in my housekeeping, expressing that the house felt cozy but lacked thorough cleaning. My husband didn't rebuff her comments and even chuckled along, seemingly siding with Jessica. Although I worked from home, I felt self-conscious about not keeping up with housework. However, If he contributed more to chores and childcare, it wouldn't be an issue. Feeling mocked and ridiculed, unable to bear the tension, I hastily left the living room for the bedroom, still holding my belongings. Frustration, sadness, and embarrassment overwhelmed me. I feared that Jessica might eventually take over my place in the family. Even after that encounter, my husband and Jessica continued their outings, displaying their relationship in front of me, leaving me speechless. I later learned from others that they often met under the guise of discussing my son's education, further deepening my sense of betrayal. Realizing the need for evidence during my husband's frequent absences, I embarked on a search that uncovered undeniable proof of his infidelity. Despite his claims that we couldn't afford gifts for birthdays or anniversaries, I stumbled upon receipts from motels, upscale restaurants, and high-end watches and jewelry in his coat pocket. Even places he insisted were beyond our financial reach had receipts, suggesting he frequented them with his mistress, not his wife. While the pain of his actions cut deep, I maintained composure and continued accumulating evidence of his affairs. Though divorce crossed my mind, I resolved to endure until David graduated from high school. Yet I vowed to gather sufficient evidence to secure a favorable position if the time for separation came. The question lingered. Where was the money for his affair coming from? As I pondered, I remembered our house's savings account for my son's college fund. A chill ran down my spine as I checked the transactions, revealing substantial withdrawals over the past few months. Shockingly, the balance had significantly decreased. The money meant for our son's education was being used for his selfish needs. The betrayal against our child overshadowed the betrayal against me as his wife. Suppressing my anger, I chose to act normal, not wanting our impressionable son to sense the brewing storm. I carried the burdens alone, trying not to burden our son who was studying diligently. However, stress took its toll, leading to small mistakes in household chores and at work. Even longtime client Mrs. Smith noticed my worn-out state, expressing concern and offering comfort. While I struggled, my husband reveled in his affair, seemingly more relaxed without my interference. Eventually, our son, David, would inevitably confront the issues within our family. Observing my downtrodden demeanor, David silently approached to help with household tasks. "I kind of know what's going on, huh?" he said, folding laundry. "Do whatever you want to do, Mom. You don't have to worry about me." His thoughtful actions, though sparing in words, warmed my heart and intensified my anger toward the traitor who touched the money reserved for our son's future. Retribution for this betrayal became a necessity. Contemplating whether to reach out to the person who had promised support, I weighed the options before me. With clenched fists, I vowed vengeance on my husband and his mistress. One evening, he suddenly announced a week-long work trip for training in another state. However, skepticism arose. The restaurant chain he worked for operated solely within our state, with no offices outside. His earlier boast about the job's perks included not having to relocate out of state. When my son casually mentioned a staff member from his club taking a week off, my husband's startled expression raised suspicions. Despite his initial pride in discussing the intense training, he grew silent and stared anxiously at his smartphone. Since confirming his infidelity, I had been monitoring both him and Jessica. A private investigator revealed that Jessica, working at the basketball facility, also had a week off. Aware that their business trip was a cover for a romantic getaway, I refrained from catching them red-handed, opting for a more strategic plan. Having planned something since discovering their intentions, I coordinated with my son, who was now on board. On the day of their trip, I bid farewell to my unsuspecting husband. My son and I, aided by relatives, began cleaning and packing. The plan was to move out while he was away and stay elsewhere until finding a new home. Supported by relatives angered by his actions yet concerned for David. To prevent my husband's access to our savings account, I transferred the remaining money to my personal account. While making preparations, I couldn't leave his belongings behind and decided to send them to a specific location with Mrs. Smith's consent. A few days after moving, my phone rang with my husband in a panic, requesting money during his supposed training. Declining, I confronted him about the account he usually withdrew from. The frantic voice of Jessica in the background signaled their financial desperation. The next day, my son and I headed to a specific location, a magnificent mansion with a well-maintained garden. Inside, we found my cheating husband and his mistress, sitting on the floor, apologizing to Mrs. Smith. She, with a stern expression, was not just a longtime client, but also the principal of the middle school attended by my son, forging a close relationship over the years. We confide in each other with our personal troubles. I'm deeply sorry for the trouble caused by my husband. In truth, it's my daughter's fault that all of this happened. It turned out that Jessica, who was on a trip with my husband, was questioned by her parents about a package she received at home and had no choice but to return immediately. Naturally, she insisted that my husband accompany her. Upon hearing Mrs. Smith's words, my husband began to shake in fear. Mrs. Smith had always been concerned about my declining health after learning about John's affair. When I finally confided in her about the affair and she discovered that the mistress was her daughter, she was utterly devastated. Despite this, Mrs. Smith wanted to make amends for her daughter's actions and had been cooperating with me ever since. Pointing at the piles of boxes, she sternly reprimanded her daughter, expressing her disappointment. "You should be ashamed of yourself for always wanting what isn't yours." Mrs. Smith scolded her daughter sternly. Her daughter attempted to defend herself, claiming it was a misunderstanding, but Mrs. Smith wouldn't hear it. She insisted on an apology, promising consequences for her daughter's actions. Ignoring Jessica's hysterics, I turned my attention to my silent husband standing beside her. "Don't you have something to say to me?" I asked sharply, prompting David, who had been standing behind me, to step forward. "She's not a regular staff there, just an intern at the club," David interjected firmly, addressing Jessica directly. "And don't you ever try to get all chummy with me again. Always flirting with men. It's disgusting." As my son spoke, it became clear that Jessica hadn't been officially hired at the club, contrary to my husband's belief. He had thought she was experienced in student education or activities, which was laughable considering her actual status. Their exchange revealed hidden truths, and as I looked at the stunned Jessica, it seemed that they both had their secrets. Before leaving, I felt compelled to offer Jessica a piece of advice. "Did you know that I pay for the rent, living expenses, and even David's tuition fees? This man, John, has been working odd jobs for years. You think he's okay?" Jen, with a face drained of color, attempted to interject, but it was too late. Jessica was so shocked by the revelation that she collapsed on the spot. From what I could tell, John had been acting as if he had plenty of money to spare, hiding the fact that I was the breadwinner of the family to save face in Jessica's eyes. I seemed like a lazy bum who neither worked nor took care of household chores properly. Mrs. Smith was left devastated, facing the harsh reality presented by my husband and Jessica. After David and I happily returned home, it appeared that John was kicked out of Mrs. Smith's house. Looking defeated with Jessica and a load of stuff, months passed since the move. On Mrs. Smith's advice, I decided to leave my divorce process to a competent lawyer. Thanks to professional assistance, all the complicated procedures went smoothly, bringing me relief. I heard that the savings I had set aside for David's education could also be added to the claim as child support. As for Jessica, rumors spread quickly at the basketball club about her affair with a student's parent, leading to her dismissal from the job. Seeking help from her parents, Jessica found Mrs. Smith unwilling to assist, leaving her lost and confused. Despising the man without money, she spat out words of disdain and abandoned John. Despite John's attempts at reconciliation, neither David nor I were willing to agree. Mrs. Smith felt terribly guilty for her daughter's role in ruining a family. I held the downcast principal's hand and said, "Let's keep working together." I'm truly grateful for the principal, thanks to whom I found a new job. Work has been going smoothly, and life with just David and me is filled with hope. David's joyful smile touched my heart as he casually expressed, "The job you do, Mom, is really amazing. You're the mom I'm proud of." Looking at a magazine featuring my illustrations, I discreetly wiped a tear from my eye. I want to keep pursuing my career as an illustrator, but above all, I want to work even harder for my precious David.
Life was not extraordinary, but it was ours. My husband, James, and I had been married for 8 years. We had a modest home, a small but steady savings account, and a routine that felt comforting. James worked as a mid-level manager in a growing tech company, and I handled freelance design work from home while taking care of our 6-year-old daughter, Emma. James often talked about his dream of becoming a director at his company, a goal he pursued with relentless ambition. I supported him wholeheartedly. Late nights at the office? I made sure dinner was ready when he returned. Weekend networking events? I juggled Emma's schedule so he could attend. James was the provider, the head of the family, or so I thought. One evening, James came home earlier than usual, an excited glint in his eye. "Big things are happening, honey," he said, kissing my forehead. "This might finally be our break." I smiled at him, feeling his enthusiasm radiate through the room. "Our break?" I teased. He nodded. "Yeah, our break. Once this next step goes through, we'll be set for life." Though he didn't share many details, I assumed it was another career opportunity. I had no reason to doubt him. James was a man who worked hard for everything he had. I trusted him completely. The first sign of trouble came a few weeks later. James started receiving strange phone calls late at night. He'd step outside to answer them, his voice low and tense. When I asked, he brushed it off as work stress and assured me that everything was fine. Soon after, I noticed other changes. James became irritable, snapping over minor things like misplaced keys or a delayed dinner. Our once happy home grew quieter, the tension so thick it felt like walking on eggshells. One afternoon, Emma brought me the mail, her tiny hands clutching a thick envelope. "Mommy, this looks important," she said, her big blue eyes watching as I opened it. It was a letter from the bank, addressed to me. The words blurred together in a haze of disbelief as I read the contents. Loan confirmation, $1 million approved under the name of Claire Wilson. My heart pounded. I'd never applied for such a loan. Why would I? We didn't need $1 million. And even if we did, I certainly wouldn't take it out without a discussion. I stormed into the living room, clutching the letter. "James," I called, my voice shaking. He appeared in the doorway, his face pale as he saw the paper in my hand. "What's this?" I demanded. He hesitated, then sighed heavily. It's for us, Claire, for the future." I had to take the loan to invest in something big. Without telling me? I shot back, anger bubbling to the surface. "You put my name on this without even asking?" James looked away, avoiding my gaze. "It's complicated. Trust me, it'll pay off. You won't have to worry about a thing." But I couldn't shake the unease. Something about his explanation didn't add up. The way he avoided eye contact, the evasiveness in his tone, it wasn't like him. In the days that followed, the weight of that loan pressed down on me like a storm cloud. I tried to dig deeper, asking James more questions, but his answers grew curt and dismissive. Then, one evening, I overheard a conversation that shattered my world. James was in his office, talking on the phone. I paused outside the door, the sound of his voice sharp and agitated. "No, I told you, she doesn't know the whole story yet," he hissed. I had to use her name. My credit wouldn't have been enough. "Just give me more time." My stomach churned. James had lied to me about everything. Not only had he taken out a massive loan without my knowledge, but he'd also done it because his own finances were in shambles. He was using me as his scapegoat. That night, I confronted him. "I heard you," I said, standing in the kitchen while he poured himself a drink. He froze, his hand tightening around the glass. "Heard what?" "The phone call. You lied to me, James. You're in debt, aren't you? That loan wasn't for us. It was to cover your mistakes." James turned to face me, his expression hardening. "Claire, you don't understand how business works. I had no choice. You had a choice," I snapped. "You could have told me the truth instead of dragging me into your mess." His response was chilling. "Don't make this a bigger deal than it needs to be," he said coldly. "You'll thank me when everything works out." But I couldn't just brush it aside. That night, as I lay awake, I realized the man I thought I knew, the man I trusted, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. In the days after confronting James, the air between us grew colder. Every glance, every word, was laced with tension. My trust in him, once unshakable, now felt like a fragile thread ready to snap. But I didn't have the luxury to dwell on emotions, I had to act. The loan was in my name, and if James's so-called plan fell apart, I'd be the one left to deal with the fallout. One morning, while James was at work, I decided to investigate. I sifted through his desk drawers and filing cabinets, looking for any clue about what he'd gotten us into. At first, all I found were old bills and office supplies. Then, tucked away in the back of a drawer, I discovered a folder marked private. Inside were documents that made my heart sink. Bank statements showed staggering withdrawals from our savings. Money I'd assumed was still there. Worse, there were contracts for what appeared to be a risky business investment. The terms were clear: if the venture failed, the entire debt would fall on me. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. James hadn't just lied, he'd gambled with our future. That evening, I waited for James to come home, the folder sitting on the coffee table like a bomb waiting to explode. When he walked through the door, his face hardened the moment he saw it. "What's this, James?" I demanded, my voice steady but laced with anger. "When were you planning to tell me you emptied our savings and tied me to your failed business scheme?" He rubbed his temples, his frustration evident. "Claire, I told you, I'm fixing everything. You don't understand how these things work." "Don't patronize me," I snapped, my voice breaking. "You put us at risk, James. You put Emma at risk. How could you do this to your family?" His expression shifted to something colder, almost dismissive. "I didn't think you'd get it," he said, turning away. "You're always so focused on playing it safe." The word stung. Was that how he saw me? As some obstacle to his ambitions? Over the next few weeks, things only got worse. James spent more and more time away from home, claiming he was handling the situation, but I wasn't convinced. His evasiveness, his growing distance, it felt like he was slipping away entirely. One evening, I overheard another phone call. This time, James wasn't hiding his tone of desperation. "I don't care what it takes," he said, his voice cracking. "I need more time, just don't let it get back to her." Who was he talking to, and what was he so afraid I'd find out? The breaking point came when a stranger showed up at our door. He was a sharply dressed man, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression that was all business. "Mrs. Wilson?" he asked. "Yes? I'm here on behalf of Mr. Thompson. He's concerned about the delays in your loan payments and wanted to ensure you were aware of the terms." The blood drained from my face. "What delays?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man frowned, flipping through his papers. "Your payments are already 2 months overdue. If they're not resolved soon, the matter will escalate to legal proceedings." I stood there, stunned. James hadn't just lied, he'd been defaulting on the loan while pretending everything was under control. That night, when James finally came home, I was waiting for him, the weight of the stranger's words pressing down on me like a vice. "Who's Mr. Thompson?" I asked, my tone icy. James froze, his face pale. "Why are you asking about him?" "Because his representative came by today. Apparently, my loan is overdue. Care to explain?" He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Claire, I didn't want to worry you. I'm working on it." "Stop lying," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "You've been lying to me for months, James. I don't even know who you are anymore." For the first time, he looked genuinely defeated. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I thought I could fix it before you found out." But his confession did little to ease the storm inside me. James had betrayed my trust, jeopardized our future, and dragged me into a mess I hadn't asked for. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't rely on James to fix this. If I wanted to protect Emma and myself, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. Little did I know, my decision would set off a chain of events that would change everything. The morning after my confrontation with James, I woke up with a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't going to sit around and let this disaster spiral further out of control. Emma and I deserved better. If James couldn't or wouldn't fix things, I would. I started by calling the loan officer. "Mr. Thompson, I needed answers, and I wasn't going to rely on James's evasions anymore." "Mrs. Wilson," Mr. Thompson said when I reached him. "It's unusual for us to hear directly from clients in this situation. Your husband has been the one managing the account." "Well, I'm managing it now," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you send me the full details of the loan agreement and any outstanding payments?" He hesitated for a moment. "Of course, but I must warn you, some of the terms your husband agreed to are quite steep." When the documents arrived later that day, I could hardly believe what I was reading. The interest rate alone was astronomical, and the penalties for defaulting were even worse. James had effectively tied us to a financial noose. I spent the next few days combing through every piece of paperwork, trying to find a way out. At the same time, I started researching local legal aid and financial advisors. I was determined to find someone who could help me untangle this mess. That's when I came across the name of a lawyer who specialized in cases like mine. Her name was Margaret Hayes, and she had a reputation for being relentless in protecting her clients. I made an appointment and walked into her office, with all my documents in hand. Margaret was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s, with an air of confidence that immediately put me at ease. "Let me get this straight," she said after reviewing the papers. "Your husband took out this loan in your name without fully disclosing the terms to you?" "Yes," I said, feeling a mix of anger and shame. I didn't know what I was signing. "He said it was for us, our family." She nodded thoughtfully. "It's not uncommon for people to trust their spouses implicitly. But this is serious. The terms are predatory, and if we can prove you were misled, there may be a way to challenge this legally." Her words were a lifeline, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of hope. While Margaret worked on the legal front, I threw myself into finding a way to bring in extra income. I had left my job years ago to focus on raising Emma, but now, desperate times called for desperate measures. I started applying to every job I could find, from administrative positions to part-time retail work. Rejection after rejection came in, each one a blow to my already fragile confidence. One day, after yet another fruitless job hunt, I sat on a park bench with Emma. She played on the swings, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around us. Watching her laugh and squeal as she soared higher, I felt a pang of guilt. She deserved stability, happiness, things I wasn't sure I could give her anymore. That's when I noticed a familiar face across the park. It was Sarah, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We'd drifted apart after high school, but back then, she'd always been the one to dream big. "Claire," she said, approaching with a look of surprise. "Is that you?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "It's been a long time, Sarah." We spent the next hour catching up. When I told her about my struggles, she listened intently. "You know," she said, "I just started working at a new company. They're always looking for reliable people, and I could put in a good word for you." It felt like fate. Sarah gave me the details, and by the end of the week, I had an interview lined up. The job wasn't glamorous, it was an entry-level administrative role, but it was something. The office was bustling, and the pace was demanding, but I threw myself into the work with everything I had. One day, as I was sorting through a stack of paperwork, I overheard two senior managers talking about a major upcoming project. They were brainstorming ideas, but seemed stuck. "Excuse me," I said, hesitantly interrupting. "I couldn't help but overhear. Maybe you could try this approach?" They looked at me with surprise, but one of them nodded. "That's actually a great idea," he said. From that day on, they began to notice me. Slowly but surely, I started earning their trust and respect. Meanwhile, Margaret called with good news. "We filed a formal complaint about the loan," she said. "If this goes to court, there's a strong chance we can argue that the agreement was predatory. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was progress." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control over my life again. But just as things were starting to look up, James threw another curveball. One evening, he came home with an announcement that left me speechless. "I've decided to sell the house," he said casually, as if it were no big deal. "What?" I said, my voice rising. "You can't just decide that on your own, James. This is our home, it's not up for debate," he said coldly. "We need the money, and this is the only way." His words felt like a slap in the face. Selling the house meant uprooting Emma, destroying the one stable thing she had left. That night, as I sat in the empty living room, I realized that James wasn't going to stop. If I wanted to protect Emma and myself, I'd have to find a way to stand up to him once and for all.
My husband gave me divorce papers. His part was already filled out. If there's anything you don't like, feel free to give this out, okay? He smiled, a smile that seemed to say he couldn't possibly be wrong. Years later, I never would have imagined that the man I married, Tatum, after an office romance, would one day make me want to slap that smile off his face. I'm Sally, a working wife married for 3 years now. We don't have kids yet. Our marriage isn't great, but it's not terrible either. My husband isn't exactly controlling, but lately he's been lazy and doesn't contribute much. It's not unusual for both spouses to share chores, but my husband refuses to help out. He still insists that housework is women's work. Maybe it's because he lived with his parents for so long, but I think it's mostly because of his influence from his family, especially his mother. When you marry someone, the type of mother-in-law you end up with can really shape your married life. It's like a luck game, and whether you get lucky or not with your mother-in-law can make a big difference. My luck? Well, it's like getting the same disappointing prize every time. Sally, can't you make a decent meal? Another miss? Today my meeting ran late, and I got home late, so when I manage to leave on time, I do cook properly. What are you talking about? For a woman, taking care of the house is more important than work. It's common sense to have dinner ready when your husband gets home. I wish that kind of common sense had stayed in the 90s. Every day after work, my mother-in-law is somehow always there. My husband gave her a spare key without consulting me, so now she comes over every day. She's always there before I arrive, but I'm too afraid to ask how early she starts settling in. Then she spends her time finding faults around the house and bombards me with criticism and snide remarks as soon as I get home. Honestly, if Tatum keeps eating like this, it's going to ruin his health. That's why I cook when I can. Sigh, my poor son, stuck with such a disappointing wife. It's frustrating. She just brushes off everything I say, like she's not even listening, and calling him my poor boy is just weird. If it happened occasionally, it might be bearable, but her coming over every single day like this is incredibly stressful. What's worse is how my husband just laughs it off and doesn't intervene. And if she's going to come over every day, the least she could do is pitch in with something. But no, she's quick to criticize and make sarcastic remarks, yet she never lifts a finger to help. Sometimes she even takes portions of the dinner I've prepared. I'm so tired. Well, I'll just take this takeaway then. Hold on, if you take that, we won't have anything for dinner. That's why I keep telling you to come home earlier and cook, but today, I couldn't. Stop making excuses. Just hurry up and cook for my dear son. I'm taking this. Oh, and I'll grab the strawberries from the fridge too. Bye now. Wait, you can't just take our dinner without asking. Even after our dinner was taken, my husband didn't say a word. I'm really getting annoyed, giving him an angry look, but he just keeps grinning foolishly. It's so frustrating. Why aren't you saying anything when our dinner was taken? It's no big deal, just a little bit. It's not just a little. They took the whole thing. Then hurry up. Huh? I'm really hungry. Hurry up and make dinner, will you? I was left speechless with anger and disbelief as my husband went to the living room and flopped down on the sofa. Ugh, this is so infuriating. At least pay for the takeout. I was seething with anger, screaming in my mind. I'm fed up with my mother-in-law showing up unannounced every day, but on the rare day she doesn't come, I feel uneasy. Why is that? When I got home from work, my mother-in-law was unusually absent. My husband, who should have been home before me, was also missing. Even though it should have been peaceful, I felt a sense of unease. The reason became clear the moment I opened the fridge. It was gone. The steak I had saved for a special occasion, bought on payday, was missing from the freezer where I had stored it. There was only one possible explanation. I hurried out of the house, jumped on my bike, and pedaled as fast as I could while still being cautious. My destination was my in-laws' house, just a 7-minute bike ride away. Finally arriving there, breathless from covering the distance in 5 minutes, I wasted no time. I pushed open the unlocked front door of their house and called out, but got no response. Yet I sensed someone inside. Knowing my mother-in-law often enters our home unannounced, I went in without hesitation. What I saw inside was shocking. There it was, my steak, the package emptied and the remains lying on the table. Seeing it almost completely eaten, I couldn't help but scream. My in-laws and, strangely, my husband looked at me in surprise. Sally, what are you doing here? Why did you barge in like this, Sally? Ignoring their questions, I grabbed the tray that had held the steak and glared at them. This is the steak I bought, right? Did you eat it without asking? Oh, that? It was delicious, thank you. My mother-in-law smiled cheerfully at me, while my face burned with anger. It's not about whether it was delicious. I bought that to share with my husband. Why did you eat it without asking? It's no big deal. Tatum had some too, but I didn't get to eat any. Hemph, serves you right for planning to eat it alone. Consider it a lesson for not buying enough for all of us. Learn from this. Why am I the one who has to learn a lesson? I looked at my husband, hoping for support, but he just grinned foolishly again. And you, why didn't you stop them? Well, I did get to have some, so it's okay if I didn't get more. There's no need to get so upset. We can just buy more. That's not the point. It's useless. Nothing I say seems to get through to my husband. Just then, tears started welling up in my eyes, and I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. I looked up to see it was my father-in-law, always calm and quiet. I never understood what he was thinking, but I couldn't believe he joined in eating it. Or maybe he didn't know I had bought it. That's what I thought. Anyway. Sally, next time, get a bigger piece of meat so we can all enjoy it properly, my mother-in-law commented casually. That's not the issue here at all. Do they have no sense of apology? Their selfish actions drained me so much that I couldn't even find the energy to respond. I'm leaving. Don't you dare come barging in here again. My mother-in-law's voice rang out as I turned to leave. My husband stayed behind, mindlessly drinking beer. At that moment, I felt utterly indifferent. A few days later, I realized I needed to have a serious talk with my husband. The conversation took a surprising turn. What? I blurted out involuntarily. While I was out working, I unexpectedly saw my husband. Seeing him wasn't unusual. He's in sales after all. However, it was strange because he had told me he was on a business trip in another state. Why? What's going on? To make matters worse, he was walking arm in arm with a woman I didn't know. Judging by his foolish grin, it was clear they had more than just a casual relationship. I instinctively hid and listened as they approached, overhearing their conversation. Tatum, why are you looking at me like that? She asked. Because you're so cute, he replied in a pathetic, lovesick tone. Their conversation continued. Do you really want to marry me? She questioned. Yes, I want to marry you as soon as possible, he assured her. Then will you get a divorce? Of course, I'll talk to her about it tonight. Decision made, he affirmed. It was confirmed. He was cheating. In that moment, I felt no shock at all. Instead, I realized I had fallen completely out of love with him. There was no love left for him in my heart. It was all gone. I'm done, I thought, feeling indifferent. I knew what I had to do. First, I needed to find a moving company. After discovering my husband's affair, I promptly moved out. 3 months later, I was busy moving once again. The movers delivered my belongings, but I had to unpack everything myself. The full-service option was too costly. As I opened the first box, the doorbell rang. As expected, there they were, my husband and the two of them. Without a word, I unlocked the door and let them in. They rang the bell again upon reaching my door, so I silently opened it. Immediately they entered. Hey Sally, long time no see, my husband greeted me. Wow, this place is really nice, remarked my father-in-law. Sally, what were you thinking, running away and buying a condo without telling us? My mother-in-law exclaimed. Yes, I had finally fulfilled my dream of buying a condo. The apartment I shared with my husband was old and worn out, and I had always hoped to move somewhere better. When I found a newly built condo that matched my dreams, I didn't hesitate to make the purchase. So when I informed my husband, he showed up uninvited with my in-laws in tow. It was exactly what I had anticipated. The three of them barged in without hesitation, but I quickly stood in front of them to block their path. Stop right there. Only residents are allowed beyond this point. What? Sally, what's gotten into you? That's harsh. They're my parents. My husband looked shocked. Sorry, Tatum, but your parents are strangers to me. Sally, how can you say that? Isn't family more important than anything? Other things matter more than that. What a bad wife. Tatum, you should leave her. Relax, Mom. But yeah, divorce might be an option. I'll ask for this condo as part of it. It's kind of small though, isn't it? Ignoring me, my husband and his family looked around the inside of the condo near the entrance. It would have been better if you got a two-family house, Sally. You really don't think about others. Exactly. She's completely thoughtless, don't you think? Yeah, I wanted my own room too, but that's tough with this place, isn't it? They kept talking, not noticing my disapproving look. Well, if we divorce, we can figure something out, right? Just as my mother-in-law reached for the doorknob leading to the living room, I gently pushed her hand away. It didn't hurt, but she looked at me shocked. Sally, how could you push my hand away like that? What's gotten into you? I'm just asking you to respect our privacy and not enter without permission. You're still strangers to me, I calmly explained, unafraid of her anger. My mother-in-law stared at me, wide-eyed. That's it, I've had enough. Fine, if that's how you feel, then we'll really become strangers. Tatum, divorce her immediately. My husband smirked oddly at his mother's sudden outburst, but I quickly spoke before he could respond. Don't worry, there's no need for that, I assured them. My husband looked bewildered. I don't know what you're misunderstanding, but I'm already single. What? How could you do that without telling me? My husband exclaimed in surprise. My mother-in-law joined in. Did you really do that? You can't just do whatever you want. Yeah, that's right. Filing for divorce without my consent is invalid. I'll take this to mediation, my father-in-law added, supporting my mother-in-law, but I had expected this. Oh, but Tatum was the one who prepared the divorce papers. Huh? What are you talking about? I have no idea. Oh, so you didn't prepare it? Remember when we first got married, you said, if there's something you don't like, feel free to bring it up without hesitation. Oh, yeah, now that you mention it. And that's when you finally remembered, right? My husband yelled, looking distressed. I never thought I'd actually need it, but I'm glad I kept it since there was something I didn't like. Why did you handle it yourself? Who does that seriously? It's not valid. Mediation, no divorce. Well, fine. Let's settle this thoroughly before we talk about divorce, okay? It seemed like everything had been anticipated. I pulled out documents and photos from a large envelope I had placed by the entrance. Inside were photos of my husband with his mistress and evidence of his affair. What's this? Evidence of your affair? My husband stammered. Diddly well, you were the one who left home, so… No, the affair started long before that. I've heard a lot from this woman, your mistress, and I even have these photos. Huh? Is that true? After leaving home, I quickly consulted with a lawyer and hired a detective. They discovered that my husband and his mistress were meeting almost daily, making it relatively easy to gather evidence of their affair. With my lawyer beside me, I confronted the mistress. Tatum told me he's divorcing you and marrying me. I'm so happy he's finally leaving you. That dreamy girl gave me lots of photos of the good times she spent with you. No, that's not true. I expected a fierce battle with the mistress, but surprisingly, the conversation went smoothly due to her naivety. Tatum will take care of my compensation and handle the paperwork, so make sure it's done. Did you wait? I didn't agree to any of this. Well, I did ask her to wait quietly until the divorce is finalized. No wonder she kept avoiding me whenever I tried to contact her. I understand. The story has taken a new direction, and your explanation won't excuse your actions anymore. You're admitting you reached out to her first. That speaks volumes. Wait, listen. It's not what you think. It's not what it seems. There's no point in arguing. You have the right to contest the divorce papers, but the divorce will happen eventually. I'll also be seeking compensation and a fair division of assets. That's how it stands. Caught off guard by these unexpected developments, my husband collapsed to the floor, or rather my ex-husband now. Considering how useless he's been as a husband, I don't expect much in terms of savings, compensation, or property division. But honestly, I'm not counting on any of that anyway. My main goal is to divorce him and break away from both him and my in-laws. That's all I hope to achieve. I have a job and income, so I'll manage. I still have savings after buying the condo. I'm not worried about my future. If I can just stand up for myself against my husband, that's enough for me. With these thoughts in mind, I looked down at my stunned husband. However, it was my mother-in-law who couldn't hold back. Wait a minute, Sally. What are you talking about? Your son cheated without our knowledge, didn't he? Well, even though our son cheated, it must have been your fault too, right? It's the wife's fault for getting cheated on. Oh, is that so? Well then, could you please leave now? This is exactly what I expected. I didn't think we'd have a reasonable conversation anyway. No matter what she says, she's just a stranger now, completely unknown to me. I decisively began to usher her out, but my mother-in-law resisted strongly against my efforts. Even if you're getting divorced, you need to hand over this condo for the property division. Why should I do that? We bought this with marital funds, right? Our son has a share too. They probably don't understand the whole situation, my mother-in-law said with a smug look. Well, if we had bought this condo with savings from our marriage, then that would be true. But unfortunately for her, that's not the case. I purchased this condo with money I had before we got married, so it's not marital property to divide. Really? Yes, that's right. Both my parents passed away shortly after I started working. That's why I had planned to care for my in-laws after marriage. But facing my mother-in-law's constant attacks and snide remarks, every day shattered that resolve completely. Tatum never contributed financially to the household. Looking back now, was he spending it on his affair? Well, it doesn't matter. I've been covering almost all our living expenses, so there are no savings from our marriage. But compensation is different. Even if it's paid in installments, please ensure your son pays it promptly. I can't believe this, Sally-san. Can't you reconsider the divorce? I'll talk sternly to my son about it. Why should I? There's no benefit for me in that. But I promise to stop criticizing from now on. Well, it's too late for that now. But how about this? Let's have steak tonight. We'll treat ourselves to some high-quality meat. Do you have money for that? Well, do you have it? If you lend it to me, I'll go buy it. No way, there's no benefit for me. With a deep sigh, I calmly addressed the three pale-faced individuals. Please leave. Wait a moment, let's talk. Please leave. Just buy the meat and go, I shouted with determination, and in that instant, they all jumped up and hurriedly left. Ah, that's a relief. Afterward, my ex-husband accepted the divorce without further resistance. Mentioning a lump sum compensation payment if he didn't agree seemed to make him realize the seriousness of the situation. His mistress was furious upon learning he wouldn't cover her share of the compensation. Well, my ex-husband felt comfortable because I was covering our living expenses, but his salary wasn't high to begin with. In fact, it was even lower than mine. Someone like him couldn't afford to pay compensation, even to his mistress. Even so, since she signed the documents, I'll make sure to collect the compensation I'm owed firmly and promptly. I was worried my ex-MIL might return, knowing the condo's location, but thankfully that concern was unnecessary. It seems she aged rapidly and lost energy due to the shock. My son, struggling on a pension, came back home in tears because he couldn't afford rent either. Surrounded by two unreliable men, my ex-FIL and ex-husband, and struggling in a tough financial situation, it seems my ex-MIL doesn't have the energy to come to my house. I heard this from my ex-husband, who pleaded with me to wait for the compensation payment. Now that I've started fresh as a single person, I'm enjoying carefree days of independence at home. There's no one making snide remarks, and no one eating my groceries without permission. I'm really enjoying living alone. Maybe I'll try some local specialties next time. Freedom is truly nice, I whispered to myself. Oh, it feels so good. Freedom, I exclaimed. It feels great. Should I open another beer?
Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte, and I'm 36 years old. I was once married to Matthew, who is 3 years younger than me. The age difference never bothered either of us, at least, not until recently. I met Matthew at a party hosted by my friend Grace. Grace and Matthew had known each other from the gym. Matthew was incredibly handsome, with a chiseled jawline and a strong build. He had this natural charisma and was always in high spirits. At that time, I was single, and Grace, eager to play matchmaker, took it upon herself to introduce me to every eligible bachelor at the party, including Matthew. "Hey, Matthew, meet Charlotte," Grace said with a grin. "She's not only smart, but also quite the catch financially." I felt a flush of embarrassment, but tried to downplay it. Grace continued, "Don't be shy, it's a compliment." I smiled awkwardly, grateful for the introduction, but hoping Grace might have mentioned some of my other qualities. Grace quickly agreed, "Absolutely. She's not just beautiful, but incredibly intelligent, too. You two enjoy your evening, I'll mingle with the other guests." Once Grace wandered off, Matthew, with a curious look, asked, "Why did she call you a nerd?" I explained, "I'm a graphic designer working for a software company, so I'm always busy. That leaves little time for socializing, which is why my friends jokingly call me a nerd." Matthew raised his eyebrows. "That's fascinating. I guess that's why they call you the millionaire nerd, then." We both laughed, and the evening unfolded with easy conversation, and we quickly grew closer. As time passed, Matthew and I spent more time together, dinners, coffees, and chats after he picked me up from work. At the time, he was working as an assistant at a local firm. A few months into dating, Matthew proposed. Though I loved him deeply, I hesitated. I wondered if our relationship was too new, and I worried about the age gap between us. "Matthew, are you sure about this?" I asked. "We've only been together a short time, and you're 3 years younger than me. Are you really serious about us?" He grinned and gently teased, "Charlotte, are you still stuck on that old idea that the husband should be older than the wife?" "It's not just that," I replied, a little defensively. "I just wanted to know if it bothered you." Matthew reassured me with a light laugh, "Chill, Charlotte. You're a modern woman. These old notions don't matter anymore." His confidence in our future together slowly eased my worries. I agreed, and soon after, we met each other's families to share our decision. While my father, Peter, had no reservations and seemed genuinely happy about the wedding, my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Charlotte, honey, I hope you've talked about your finances with Matthew," she whispered, her face showing a trace of concern. "Yes, Mom, don't worry about that," I reassured her. She pressed on, "I just want to make sure that your career success, especially since you're doing so much better than Matthew, doesn't become an issue." You know, sometimes men can feel overshadowed by those things. Mom, Matthew is really sweet and understanding, I explained. He doesn't have those kinds of insecurities. He's even agreed to take on more household chores since my schedule is so hectic. That's good to hear, dear. Just take care of yourself, she said, her tone softening. Despite her reassurance, her words lingered in my mind. I realized I'd never had a detailed conversation about finances with Matthew, nor had I asked him about his income. While my financial independence meant I wasn't overly concerned with his earnings, I recalled that Matthew had asked about my salary even before he proposed. The thought of it unsettled me for a moment, but I chose to push the worries aside, deciding to focus on the excitement of starting our married life together. After the wedding, we celebrated with a honeymoon in Hawaii, a generous wedding gift from my company. We truly embraced the joy of our time together, savoring the beginning of our new life. However, about a month later, Matthew came to me after dinner with a serious expression. "Honey, I'm sorry to ask this, but I need your help," he said, looking uneasy. "What's going on, Matthew? Is everything okay?" I asked, my concern growing. "Well, no. My parents are having some issues," he began. "They live in an apartment on the second floor, and without an elevator, it's becoming difficult for them as they get older." I understood the situation right away. "I see. Why not move them to a ground floor unit, or somewhere with an elevator?" I suggested. Matthew hesitated, then steered the conversation in another direction. "Actually, Charlotte, I was thinking more along the lines of building a house for them," he admitted, surprising me with his proposal. I paused, taken aback. "Okay, but I hope you realize how expensive it is to build a house," I replied, trying to grasp the scope of his idea. I tried to gauge Matthew's understanding of the financial commitment he was suggesting. "Do you realize how much this will cost?" I asked, hoping to get a sense of his plan. "Yeah, I know," Matthew replied, though his tone lacked confidence. I pressed further. "Do you have enough savings, or are you thinking about taking out a loan?" Matthew hesitated for a moment before answering. "Charlotte, I was actually hoping you could lend me the money to build the house," he said, his request catching me completely off guard. I was stunned, unsure of how to respond. "Wait, what? But you know I've been saving to buy my own house someday, right?" "Yeah, but since you earn well, I thought it wouldn't be a problem for you," Matthew said, his voice taking on a more assertive tone. "But Matthew, I'm not sure I can lend that much money," I replied, feeling the pressure mounting. "Why not?" he asked, his frustration starting to show. I was at a loss for words. I finally managed to say, "Okay, let me think about it. I'll let you know. I'll wait for your answer," he said, leaving the conversation hanging in the air. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spent hours turning the situation over in my mind. Lending my hard-earned savings to build a house for his parents felt risky. My money was meant for my own future security, including buying a home and saving for retirement. The next morning, as I was heading out for work, Matthew hugged me and said, "I'll be waiting for your decision. Let's talk over the weekend. I know you're in a rush now." Conflicted and uneasy, I sought advice from a colleague. She suggested I make the financial arrangement official with a contract. "Have Matthew sign an agreement to ensure he repays you," she advised. "It's important to protect your interests." That sounded like a sensible approach, so that evening I told Matthew, "I can lend you the money, but you'll need to sign a contract agreeing to repay me within 4 years." To my surprise, Matthew didn't hesitate. "Okay, I'll sign it," he said. When I handed him the papers, though, his laughter at the mention of the legal implications made it clear he hadn't fully grasped the seriousness of the situation. "I'm serious, Matthew," I said, holding his gaze until he realized I wasn't joking. "Here are the papers." He sighed, rolled his eyes, and with a smirk, said, "Fine, I'll sign." And he did. After I transferred the money and Matthew signed the contract, I thought the legal safeguards would ease my concerns, but despite those protections, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Matthew's salary wasn't substantial, and I doubted his ability to repay the loan. Then, his behavior began to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. Since taking the loan, Matthew became increasingly distant and his actions more peculiar. He started coming home late, often too exhausted to help around the house. Whenever I voiced my frustrations, he brushed them off, claiming his job was overwhelming. My feelings for him began to fade as he grew more detached, spending most weekends overseeing the construction of his parents' new home and, at times, not coming home at all. Instead, he opted to stay at his parents' place, further deepening the rift between us. The situation was taking its toll on me. I could no longer ignore the growing distance between us, and I decided it was time to confront Matthew. Matthew, do you realize how distant you've become? It feels like you're taking advantage of living here without contributing anything, I said, frustration bubbling to the surface. His response was sharp and dismissive. What do you mean? How dare you accuse me like that? You knew my financial situation when we married. You chose this. I was stunned by his audacity. Excuse me, I'm not trying to start an argument, but how can you be so indifferent? I'm even more upset about this housewarming party at your parents' new place tomorrow. A party for the house I funded, which you never even told me was finished. Matthew almost scoffed. Oh, my bad. I must have forgotten. Please, be our guest, he said nonchalantly, then left the house humming, as if utterly unbothered by the gravity of our conversation. Fuming with anger, I wanted to lash out, to break something, but I managed to hold myself together. An hour later, I received a call from my mother-in-law. Hello, just calling to let you know we're having a housewarming party at the new house tomorrow, she said casually. I hung up without saying another word. I was certain that Matthew had prompted her to invite me, not out of genuine desire, but simply as an afterthought. His indifference, paired with the casual invitation from his mother, left me deeply hurt and questioning the very foundation of our relationship. I had always been wary of Matthew's relationship with his mother, especially given her cold demeanor toward me from our first meeting, which had only worsened after our wedding. Despite this, I didn't want to create more tension between us. I worried that if I skipped the event, Matthew and his mother would use it against me, accusing me of being envious of their new home. Reluctantly, I decided to go. I decided to attend the housewarming, determined to maintain a composed, if somewhat forced, demeanor. As I arrived at the newly built house, I couldn't help but notice the entrance, beautifully adorned with floral decorations. Matthew and his mother were greeting guests warmly. When my mother-in-law saw me, her reaction was far from enthusiastic. Oh, you came. I thought you wouldn't bother, she remarked with a hint of surprise. Why would you think that? Matthew chimed in, before ushering me inside. Inside, I was met more warmly by my father-in-law, who was sitting alone. His genuine smile and the sincere gratitude he expressed for my financial help were the only moments of comfort in an otherwise uncomfortable evening. It was painfully clear that neither Matthew nor his mother had acknowledged my contribution to their new home. Throughout the evening, I felt more and more isolated. Matthew and his mother barely interacted with me, leaving me to engage in half-hearted conversations with distant relatives. I found myself counting down the moments until I could leave what was rapidly becoming a toxic atmosphere. After most of the guests had departed, I approached my father-in-law to say goodbye. Take care of yourself, I said kindly. Just then, my mother-in-law interjected sharply. You don't need to worry about my husband. Focus on your husband instead of neglecting him. Confused and upset, I responded, what do you mean? I've never neglected Matthew. He volunteered to help with chores because I work full-time, too. Her accusations grew harsher. You've been a terrible wife, forcing my son to do all the work around the house. And how could you coerce him into signing that financial agreement? You've been nothing but cruel to him. I haven't forced Matthew into anything. The agreement was mutual, to ensure financial security. How can you say I've abused or tortured him? I replied, shocked by her words. At that moment, my father-in-law stood up for me. Marilyn, stop. Why are you attacking her instead of appreciating what she's done for us? But Marilyn wasn't having it. Just stay out of this and go inside, she snapped at him. The situation was excruciating, and it was clear that no amount of reasoning would change her view of me. As the evening went on, I became more disillusioned with both my relationship and the family dynamics I had found myself tangled in. I was completely taken aback by Marilyn's rude behavior toward Alan and, soon after, her cruel words toward me. You should be grateful my son even married you. Who else would marry someone old and unattractive like you? She sneered. Her words stung deep, and I lost my temper. How can you speak to me like this? I retorted, my voice rising with frustration. Matthew quickly intervened, scolding me. Charlotte, watch your language. How dare you raise your voice at my mother? Didn't you hear how she just insulted me? I replied, bewildered by his lack of support. Matthew dismissed me with a roll of his eyes. "I can't deal with your tantrums anymore," Matthew snapped. "Tantrums? Do you see how both you and your mother are treating me?" I exclaimed. "I can't stand to be around this negativity anymore. I don't want any part of it in my new dream home. Just get out." Matthew's response was cold and cutting. "What? Yes. I don't want to live with someone as despicable as you. You've been living off my income, and now you call me trash? You're pathetic. Charlotte, let's be clear, you married me because you thought you couldn't land someone as handsome as me, given your age and looks, even though I wasn't earning much. So, you have no right to complain about money now." A surge of anger and betrayal rushed through me. I can't stay with someone so shallow. I want a divorce, and I want my money back, I yelled. Matthew laughed maliciously. "Sure, go ahead and get your divorce, but remember, you'll have to pay me if you want it." "What the hell? You should be the one to pay, since you want the divorce," I argued back. Matthew's demeanor turned sinister, a side of him I had never seen before. "You'll have to give back the money I lent you, or I'll sue you," I threatened. "Go ahead and find your stupid papers first." Mocking me, he retorted, "You're wasting your time." Feeling numb and utterly defeated, I left. They had insulted and degraded me beyond endurance. I went straight to the bank, where I had secured the papers in a locker, only to discover the document was missing. When I checked the bank log, I saw that Matthew had accessed the locker months ago. We had opened the joint account after our wedding, intending for both of us to contribute, but it turned out I was the only one putting money in. This revelation only deepened my shock and sense of betrayal. After the unsettling discovery, I checked my wardrobe, where I also kept a copy of the loan agreement, but it too was gone. It became painfully clear how deeply Matthew had manipulated our relationship from the start. His charm at Grace's party, his focus on my financial status, living comfortably off my earnings, and emotionally pressuring me to finance his parents' house. Every move had been calculated. His final act? Attempting to steal the agreement to prevent me from reclaiming my money. But I had anticipated his deceit. Sensing his eventual betrayal, I had taken the precaution of keeping the original documents at my parents' house, storing copies at the bank and in my wardrobe. Despite the emotional turmoil and the insults I endured, I was relieved I had trusted my instincts. I immediately called my mom and explained everything. She was furious. "You need to sue Matthew and his mother for everything they've done," she suggested. During our conversation, she confessed, "I've always had doubts about Matthew's intentions." "Did you know about his motives?" I asked. "No, not exactly," she replied, "but I sensed his eagerness wasn't genuine. He rushed into marriage so quickly." "You're right, Mom. I should have been more cautious. When you asked if we discussed our finances, I lied and said we had. I never really did, nor did I inquire about his earnings, because I wasn't concerned about his money. Take this as a lesson, dear, don't trust someone so readily," she advised me with a heavy heart but clear mind. I hired a lawyer and prepared the divorce papers. I included an official notice demanding that Matthew repay the borrowed amount within 4 years. If he failed to comply, the court would be authorized to sell his property to reimburse me. When Matthew and his mother received the divorce papers and repayment notice, they were caught off guard. Suddenly, they were the ones feeling desperate, trying to reach out to me, but I was resolute in my decision to protect myself from further deceit. I ignored all their attempts to contact me, blocking their numbers. Matthew even tried to reach my parents, but they dismissed his calls. He left a voicemail on my office phone apologizing, professing his love, claiming he was misled by his mother's influence, and hoping for reconciliation. But Matthew's history of manipulating my emotions had taught me to be wary. I deleted the voicemail and ensured his number stayed blocked. Matthew's lawyer later sent a message, pleading for me to forgive at least 60% of the debt, citing Matthew's inability to meet the repayment terms due to his low salary. I dismissed the request outright. After everything, the deceit, the personal attacks, it was unthinkable to me that he would expect any leniency. 4 years dragged by. Matthew struggled to gather even half of the owed amount, resorting to taking out loans. Given his modest income, the bank's loan offerings were insufficient, and he was forced to sell the house he had once banished me from. Ultimately, he moved back into his parents' old apartment. Grace, a mutual friend, informed me that the local community had turned cold toward Matthew and his family after the truth emerged. Marilyn, his mother, resorted to working as a nanny, her behavior having alienated her from many. Matthew faced ostracization at work, which led him to resign and relocate to another city. Even Alan, Matthew's father, left Maryland and moved to the countryside to retire in peace. Amid these developments, my personal life took a positive turn. I began dating Wayne, a 37-year-old colleague. We had known each other for years but only connected romantically after an office party, a year following my divorce. This time, I approached the relationship with caution, taking the time to understand and appreciate our connection before making any serious commitments. Reflecting on everything, I felt no sympathy for Matthew or Marilyn. Their outcomes were just consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, I enjoyed the budding relationship with Wayne, cherishing our moments together and looking forward to what the future might hold.